Just one big joke. It's a fucked up world. Here we are in. I ain't going nowhere.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Reason Reborn, episode 30. Jeez, 5, 6. What is this? 35. That's where we're at. How's it going? Hope you guys are doing okay. Been a crazy week, and it's probably just going to get crazier. And I forgot to mention one topic that we were going to talk about, but we can't skip that topic. And I think you know what topic that is because it's the biggest news that we've gotten all week. But I'm here with my co-host, Cardiacsumo. Say what's up to the people.
What's up, scumbags? I mean, people.
Okay, so he called you scumbags. Just remember that.
I
appreciate you.
My best.
I appreciate you. He don't. He got issues. But speaking of issues, our president. Let's just go ahead and dive right into it. Oh, before we do, is there anything you want to talk about that's pleasant so we can kind of ease into this?
We're gonna dominate.
Any news? Oh fuck! You just don't want to ease into shit, do you? You just want to go right in. Like no.
I tried my best.
No romance, no foreplay, no sweet sayings. Just jam it right in there. Okay, let's just go. All right. Yeah. So, if you haven't heard, we have a really big issue in this country. We don't dominate space. Space is too open and free for anybody to take it. We need to take it now because eventually the rest of the world is going to realize that they can dominate the hell out of the United States just as easily in the vast openness of space as they seemingly do to us now, according to the president of the United States. So with that said, there's an initiative now introduced by the president of the United States. People, I know you hate hearing this, but he is actually the president. It makes me just as sick as it does you. But God damn it, he is our president. Yesterday, he decides that we need to have another military arm. And that military arm will be the Space Force. And they will dominate space for the United States. He actually said that we need to dominate space.
So do you disagree with that? I mean, do we not need to dominate space?
His fat ass dominates space in his office. That's about the only domination he knows of. Like, oh my God. So just for reference, this broke me last night. You guys don't know how, and I don't think you really know how much this shit broke me. Like, I was really, really I was really fucked up when I heard this. It was a thing. And I'm still fucked up. I'm still very mad. And I have questions, but go ahead and say how you feel, because I'm just mad.
Well, first of all, I am very much aware of how much it upset you because, one, after you sent it to me, you kept going on about how much it was upsetting you. And then when I woke up, you were like, nope, still pissed. I could sense the ire from here across the country, halfway across the country. Very much aware of the disdain there. I think the thing I said to you was that if somebody like Obama had said something like that, it probably would have been like uplifting. Maybe it would have been to this generation what the space race times were to other guys. I wasn't around back then, so I don't know what that felt like. But hearing Trump say it, it's like anything else he says, you can't believe him at all. I believe the response from the Pentagon was like, what the fuck's this guy talking about? So.
I would have that response too, because now you want us to allocate federal funding for a brand new department which has no real development. Our fucking space program is stagnant. The fuck you think the Space Force is going to be like? And for while I'm not old enough to remember when Kennedy initiated the whole space thing, I'm old enough to remember when space was kind of a big deal, in particular in the early '80s. And it wasn't that big of a deal. It was an exciting thing, of course, to see a launch and to see them send astronauts up. And we had, tragedy with a couple of one, Discovery, and I forget the name of the other one that exploded. But there's been a couple of tragedies. But for the most part, the United States generally didn't take the space thing serious. It was only taken kind of serious because it was more of a competition in the beginning, like who can get there first, us or Russia. It was that weird Cold War. I gotta outdo the other bullshit. But that faded into something that's more like, they wanted to be a more scientific progression thing. And I think that's when the government kind of fell off on it, because it was like, wait, we don't have Russia to beat anymore. So what the fuck we need this for? When, people of science are thinking like we can make discoveries and do experiments and possibly find different forms of life. They're all for the exploration part, but the government, once Russia pretty much, the Soviet Union, I should say, pretty much disbanded, the idea of all the grand space things that we were talking about. Like I mentioned to you last night, how Ronald Reagan came up with this whole idea for military defense platforms and called the Initiative Star Wars, where we were gonna develop and send up these satellites with lasers to defend us from nuclear attacks.
And now they're there. And now we're
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, my comparison to that era was maybe a little bit much, but I guess the point I was making is I didn't grow up in an era where there was a strong excitement around space exploration and, that type of science. So when I heard him talk about this, what the fuck's he calling it? Space Force, the separate but not equal space force, or equal, whatever it was. Separate but equal. I don't fucking know.
Yeah, it was a weird alliteration from him.
When he talked about his Space Force, it made me sad because it's like, this is one of the rare times where you hear somebody in power really talk about space stuff, and it's him, and he's being a dumbass about it. So it was kind of depressing when I heard him say it, just based on that sort of comparison.
By the way, have you been following the memes and the tweets about this that have been hilarious?
I've avoided. I mean, well, first of all, this happened like yesterday. Like, I can't keep up with the internet, bro. I'm sorry. This was like last night. I'm sure there's like a million of them by now, but some people got to work. Shit.
Yeah, no, it's been hilarious. One of the famous ones, of course, is the scene from a James Bond movie. Have you ever heard of what's the name of the movie? Gosh, it just came on my Moonraker. Have you ever heard of that?
Don't think so.
Oh, Moonraker is a James Bond movie where they actually went up to space because some crazy scientist decided to build a fucking laser platform to rain down death and destruction on the world if he didn't get his way. Because James Bond's villains, they're always about taking out the whole planet to get whatever they want. James Bond had to go up to the space station and confront this guy, and it eventually all ended in this huge space battle where you just got people in astronaut suits, like short jetting around with lasers attached to their suits, shooting at each other. And it's the weirdest thing because it's like, this is, mind you, this is like what, late 70s, early 80s movie. So imagine that type of like representation of like astronaut space battles. And how it had to be. And people have been floating that around like this is our space force. Oh man. And then of course you have, people doing the Buzz Lightyear thing all over the place. I saw somebody actually came up with a fucking shield and like logo for the Space Force. Like people have been going really great. Even I had to ask myself because I had to post this on Twitter, and I want to post this question to you: if this Space Force is somehow going to be a reality, I have some questions for you. So,
Okay.
all right. So, number one, what do you think should be the enlistment age?
For the Space Force.
Yes. Like, what makes you viable for a Space Force? Because remember, there's no gravity, so weight shouldn't be a problem. I can move around just fine
The
with my
artificial
fat
gravity,
ass.
I guess.
Huh? Yeah, with my fat ass, I can be just as like active as any of y'all right now. So,
um, I want to say like 21, 22. I feel like you should have higher than, the same way we have with astronauts, right? Like you can't just be an astronaut. I assume you have to have some level of education and training and stuff. So,
okay, that's my second question. What is the level of training and education? Because I can make a point that you played enough video games, you might be educated and trained.
well, I guess that before I can answer that, I need to know like what exactly the Space Force does. Because I didn't
They
quite understand
dominate space,
against
apparently.
other space armies.
Yeah.
Like I'm assuming we're trying to dominate it in comparison to like other humans. I guess we have to train them in space combat, which is not a thing now, so I don't know how you train them, but
Well, we have plenty of material. Again, video games. I mean, Call of Duty had a space scene. You could use that for reference of how you can fight, Star Wars and things like that. Because we all know that ships banking in space is a reality, right? There's plenty of air for airplanes to bank in space.
I mean, so like if a Space Force person, decides to just kind of dive into the atmosphere, are they like out of their jurisdiction because that's Air Force territory? Like how does that work?
Yeah, that's another good question. What is the like territorial limits? Because once you enter the atmosphere, shouldn't that be the domain of the Air Force? No Space Force missions could be conducted once you hit the atmosphere.
I'm sticking with
Because remember, we have like Halo jumpers that are damn near in space. They got that. That's their area.
gotta
So,
be I guess out of the atmosphere. I don't know.
also, the most important question: what are the ranking conventions? Because we have several examples, such as Star Wars, which kind of use, kind of a bit more mix of probably more of a marine type ranking thing because they have some naval things like captains, but usually they just use commander and things like that. So it's like some naval slash marines type things. Star Trek is all naval. We can go with the naval route like Star Trek, right? You have ensigns, you have captains, you have admirals, lieutenants, things like that. First officers. Should we go with the naval? Do we use alien races? Klingons have their own thing. That would be unique. We can go with the Romulans.
I want to use like regular Earth terms like captain. Let's just use like space stuff like
or like a hybrid, like Battlestar Galactica has a hybrid of like Marine, Army, and Navy things. Like you can have
like you like first dwarf star or something like use space term.
Yeah, like why not have Star-Lord as the overall leader? The Star-Lord, things like that. Like what do we call these people?
Guess it's as good as mine, bro.
Yeah.
We're gonna call them the fucking Space Force, and it's gonna be awesome. That's it. I don't know what to say about it. It sounds it sounds ridiculous. Two, it just sounds like an attempt to distract us from everything else that's going on, which has failed because at best everybody's just making fun of it. Nobody's really talking about it like that.
But this goes back to what we were kind of saying last week about how this man throws out these policies and things, and then other people have to actually go to work and try to like take this serious because he he's not joking.
I don't think he's joking. I don't, I don't know. I don't think he's joking, but I don't think he's serious either. But I also don't think he's just lying. I feel like he's just saying words because he can just spew them out without real consequence.
But again, if I'm someone who works for the Department of Defense, you're on national TV declaring that we organize, you know, a brand. This the audacity of this whole thing is just so fucking hilarious. But no, seriously, you're telling the military that they have to like now initiate this whole thing. Don't you do your duty? Or do you just say, okay, you're tripping Donald and not do anything?
I guess your
you're
point.
muted.
I guess your point was that their duty is to do what he wishes. I feel like part of their duty could be to say, that's dumb as shit. We're not doing it. I mean, I don't know. I guess you can't just say no to the commander in chief.
Well, we kind of got in one of the other stories. We kind of got an example of how maybe you can, but at the same time, I feel like if you're somebody at least a part of his immediate team, you probably can't. You probably do have to come up with some type of plan for at least somebody, at least come up with a plan and then have people be like, okay, yeah, we can't do this. You know what I mean? Like they at least have to have some paperwork because I feel like you can't just dismiss that this might be something that he really, really wants,
I mean, how the fuck are we talking about a space?
I know that's the problem. We're actually having a serious conversation about the possibility of developing. Like I know I'm joking, but we are having a serious conversation about whether or not.
But that's the
this
problem.
is
We have to have a serious conversation about a fucking space force because he said it out loud. That's the only reason we're talking about this. Why does the nation have to talk about shit like a space force? Oh my god. The number of like ridiculous shit we've had to talk seriously about because he just spewed it out of his mouth one day is insane.
Yeah. And it's funny, I saw an article earlier today that somebody posted about how studies have shown that they feel Donald Trump is causing mental damage to all of us. And I'm like, no shit. Because he gotta fucking, like, the things that we hear him say and do are just ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Just like the news article I just sent you not too long ago, where an announcement's been made that the United States is pulling out of the UN Humanity Council, Ethics Council. I'm sorry, which is a fucking big deal. We're basically telling people that the Human Rights Council is not a thing, and it's horrible. Our point of being like removing is saying that they're immoral. We think they're too immoral and they're politically biased. More importantly, the bias is towards Israel, which apparently our standpoint is they don't treat Israel right because Israel's stance on Palestine bothers other people in the world, which it should.
Sure. They're not super nice.
Yeah. And we have an issue with that, so we're pulling out of a human rights council for bias against people violating human rights. What the fuck?
I mean, I don't want you to ask me that question.
That's why I said what the fuck, because I can't answer you that question in good faith because I feel like I would be violating your human rights. Like I would be causing you mental anguish and pain and suffering for no reason other than just to do it.
No, it is a serious issue though for him, the administration, I guess, to just up and say, hey, yeah, we're backing out of this. What you can have some criticisms, I guess, if you want, of that thing, but what is everybody's instinct to just like back out or just break everything instead of fixing things that are wrong? You know, there's always just this instinct like if anything is wrong with it, fuck it, destroy it, get away from it, it's over. Boom. Like the healthcare thing, right? You see some flaws with that, so hey, let's just throw it in the garbage. Don't have to worry about any of the sick people, just, throw it in the garbage and then we'll do something else at some point, maybe.
Yeah, it's
Our standing with the world is in great peril here. We cannot just do this type of shit and expect them to just be okay with it.
yeah, it's weird because it's weird timing too. I feel like the timing is very ominous because we'll get to this last before we roll into our final topic, but with the whole immigration thing, I find it weird that you would pick now when you're going through a human rights issue to decide, you know what, this is the best time for us not to be on a human rights council. Maybe he noticed the hypocrisy. Like that's the best way I could frame it. It's like maybe he just realized it's just too hypocritical for us to be a part of this when we're not actually up to snuff in this department, which of course we know that's not, because again they've officially said that they just feel like they're biased against Israel and that it's just a horrible place that's full of bias and they can't deal with it. So we know the reason why, but
this notion that they noticed that they were being hypocritical in being part of that thing, like, I just didn't interpret it that way. I saw that as, the UN was lecturing us about human rights. So instead of actually listening to them, we just won't be part of that human rights council anymore, and that we don't have to listen. It's just, if you don't like the rules of the game, just stop playing. That's just the strategy I saw in doing that. I think the Israel thing was like a stupid excuse, but I certainly didn't think that they were self-conscious enough to realize that they were being hypocritical and then backed out to not look hypocritical. They just figured if they're
no,
not.
I know exactly what it is. It's the same thing as it is with just about everything. He doesn't like that people don't agree with him. So instead of actually negotiating and working with people to get a solution, he's trying to put the screws to them and saying, I'll show them if we're not here, then they'll beg us to come back because they need us. He likes to pull that thing where he puts you in a situation where he can have one up on you or feel like he's got the upper hand. Like, you got to do what I say or nothing's going to happen. And I don't think that he realizes this, that with world issues, 9 times out of 10, they don't necessarily need us. There are ways that you can actually figure it out. It kind of works for some of the things within borders, but you can't tell the rest. Like, I think we're far beyond, I think I said this before, but I think we're far beyond the point where America's, position in the world is not the way it was. The level of dependency that other countries have had on us isn't as, looming as it had been in past. There's a lot of things that we have that a lot of countries do need and want, but I think the world has gotten to a point where they can sustain themselves a little bit better without just totally collapsing and folding to the whim of America,
Sure, which is what really makes this whole thing. By thing, I mean his seemingly mission to pull us away from the rest of the world very concerning, is that we just don't have the same, I was going to say status, but they don't need us as much. So it's easier for them to say, okay, fuck off, than it probably used to be. As much as we've been a leader in a lot of ways in the world, but we don't have to be a leader. Is what I'm afraid they're going to realize.
Yeah, no, he discounts people's resolve. That's one of his problems, is that, looking at the trade war thing, for example, China is not backing down. China, they need a lot from us, but China's just like, no, we also know your dependency on us because a lot of your stuff is manufactured here. So good luck with trying to, like, somebody made a good point about how, take cell phones. Samsung and iPhones are the two biggest brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
The majority of their factories are in China. That stuff would have to be imported over from China, which means these tariffs that China is inflicting upon, are going to inflict upon us if we hit them, means that things are going to cost more because companies are going to have to pay a lot more to get their products into the market. So you're looking at like an iPhone. iPhones are already expensive as fuck. How much is like the iPhone 10? That's just like $1,000 or something like that.
You gotta get
Imagine
a mortgage on that shit.
Right. You basically gotta put out a note. It's gonna be like getting a car. You can buy a used card probably for the price of a iPhone if he allows this trade war to go on. They can do that. I'm thinking about, like, from my perspective as a gamer, PlayStation 5. I'm not paying $800 for a console because this fucker wants to fucking try to duke it out with other countries because he wants to try to squeeze them for money. No.
He seems to truly underestimate how, if not dependent, at least linked we are with those countries, where I feel like he doesn't understand that there could be consequences to doing this. Like, he seems to think because we're America and we've always been so powerful, we can do what we want and nobody can challenge us. And yet you look at China's reaction to those tariffs and this whole trade war thing. What are they doing? They're not just slapping us back. They're slapping us back specifically to hurt his base. The people in, like, what's that that area, like Midwest America, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, he's China's not just able to hit us, but he's able to hit him directly because we have such linked economies. You look at even Canada. The second he tried to do something with them, even Trudeau was like, I mean, we Canadian and all, but we're gonna, fuck you up. Don't mess with us.
Yeah, like, okay, remember the pipeline that he had us want to build?
Sure.
You know what that's being made with, right?
Love.
Well, I sincerely doubt that, but Canadian steel, which we have to import to make this, which means that when Canada hits us with the tariffs, that shit's going to triple in price. It's already a ridiculous price he wants to spend on this goddamn pipeline, and now that's just going to, like, double or triple. Because why? Because Canada's like, fuck you. You want this shit? You need this shit. We're gonna, like, hit you since you're gonna hit us back, and it's just gonna make our tax money go to, like, more waste. Now you're looking at a potential situation where if he really wants that pipeline, he's gonna have to make a decision on what he's gonna cut from. Knowing him, he's going to cut from essential things that we really need, like Medicaid, like, education, because he doesn't value those things. So he's not going to hit things that he values. He's going to hit things that we value. And this is going to make things socially worse, because now we're going to be less educated. We're not going to have funding for certain things. Certain facilities aren't going to be met.
Can I pause you there just for a sec? That exact thing you're saying about, what we do and have funding for and what we don't and what we're using it on. That was exactly one of the things I was thinking about with that fucking space.
Right.
What the fuck do you call it? Space Force thing? I was like, where are you getting all of this fucking money from? When you keep saying that all these other countries are fucking our economy in the ass and jobs were terrible before me and blah, blah, blah. Where the fuck does all this money keep coming from? This, arming teachers, all this? I'm sorry, I just had to point that out because I had forgotten. It was one of the things that popped in my head when I saw the Space Force thing. Continue.
No, and it's funny that you said that because the armor teachers thing. But yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. That is 110% right. You keep throwing out these things that are going to cost us money. How are we getting this money? The tax bill. You swore you just cut taxes so we don't pay many. If we're not paying as much taxes as where's this money coming from? We're not paying as much taxes. You have all these other initiatives. What the fuck? How are we funding this shit? Like,
are we selling drugs to Mexico?
Clearly,
That's
we
why
must
we're
be
cutting off the drug flow into the country so we can like sell.
Yeah, because we want the market. Yeah, you got to corner the market. Like, no, you come to us for the drugs or something like that. Maybe Russia's footing this bill. I don't know, but it makes no sense. It's like it's insane. It's madness, and it sounds like Trump. It sounds like Trump how he was when he was just a businessman. This guy thinks that he has infinite resources, and as a businessman, you sort of do because you can file bankruptcy like he's done many times and skate away. You can't do that with the country, bro. The countries don't work like that. So I would love to know what's the game fucking plan? Seriously.
I think the game plan is just what he says. It's not a smart game plan. I believe that he genuinely believes that shit will work. I believe that he genuinely believes we can win trade wars, that we don't have to really be united with any of the other countries in the world. All of the dumb shit, the things that we assume are dumb are things I think he genuinely believes. And I think that's the problem, is that most of the rest of us acknowledge that this stuff is stupid. And I don't think we take it seriously enough that he's dead serious that he thinks this will work. And he has the type of ego that will not allow him to concede. Because we've seen it plenty of times where he'll do or say something and everybody will say that it's stupid, and he'll just keep saying it anyway. Again, arming the teachers. Nobody agrees with that fucking idea, but he kept saying it. So
yeah, and it's just like, well, really quickly, let's talk about Paul Manafort, and then we'll go to the last thing, because this whole thing with like Space Wars and I said Space Wars. What is it? Whatever it's fucking called. I don't care. It's dumb shit.
It's Star Wars. Oh, wait.
We already had that problem before. Like, although I will say this, I will excuse Ronald Reagan now that we know that this man was suffering from his Alzheimer's while in office. So at least he has that excuse. Like, yo, I was literally losing my mind. He has that.
So does Trump not have that excuse?
No, I just think that his excuse, if he has an excuse, is that he's a maniacal, like, person. He's a maniac. It's not a case of, oh, I have a degenerative mental disease. No, this man's just batshit insane. So no, but Paul Manafort, the guy who Trump came out and said that he has no relation to, even though he was the chairman of his election committee. So how you not like have no involvement with your election chairman? I don't know, but okay. So Paul Manafort has been living kind of the good life as he's been on house arrest for the most part, under 2 house arrests, by the way. The state of Virginia and the federal government both had his ankles locked down.
That shit makes me laugh. Like, they each got an ankle. Like, come on, bro.
Right. Like, yo.
What is it good enough? You guys take the left ankle. We'll put our shit on the right.
And have you ever seen those things?
They look comfortable.
Those are the biggest, bulkiest, like I actually remember seeing someone come into some place where I work. I don't know if it's at my current job or somewhere else. And like I saw him adjust that thing. I was like, God, that has to be annoying. It's just like walking around the fucking remote control strapped to your leg. Jeez. And they make it this big and gaudy and noticeable as possible, I think, on purpose. Just so people would know, yeah, he did something. Yeah, but So
I wonder what they would do if like one of them reported that he left the house, but the other one didn't.
that's what I wonder, because it's like, what's for the state of Virginia? So what's the like jurisdiction? Is it outside of the state of Virginia? And if he goes outside of Virginia, does it trigger? And he has to make a call and say, I'm going to DC, because where he lives and where the city of DC is not that far. You run over, like, just traveling our interstate system. You'll go in and out of Virginia and Maryland and DC within like minutes of each other, just looping around. That's how close like shit is in some cases. So it's like, okay, I'm leaving Virginia and I want to go to a store in DC. Do I have to report this? Or are they gonna like come get me? Like, that has to be weird. Well, he doesn't have to worry about that anymore, because Robert Mueller got an injunction by a federal judge that said that, you know what, after filing claims that Manafort was jury tampering, he got an injunction from a federal judge that mandated Manafort to prison until his trial. So right now, Paul Manafort is in jail, and can't get out until the completion of his trial. Yeah.
No, I thought you said jury tampering.
Oh, I probably did say jury tampering. Sorry, witness tampering. My bad. But yeah, he was tampering with witness.
Awesome, by the way. The number of fucking charges they've got on this guy.
And you're gonna add that to the list. How fucking bright are you?
I mean, those were some heavy sentences, so maybe you could argue it was worth the gamble. Not that he's been sentenced yet. I just mean he was already at a risk for like quite the sentencing. So
I get what you're kind of saying, but here's the problem: Mueller's been working down that list of people connected to this thing, and you gotta think like you have to be really, really good to do that, because you have to be at least 4 steps ahead of Mueller, so that you can get to someone way before Mueller decides to push the button on them. So, yeah, that was a foolish gamble to me, because Mueller's been on it. Like, didn't like another like 4 or 5 people get indicted last week for some shit, like Russians and all that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's like, no, you really gambling if you think you're gonna outsmart and outfox Mueller and get to somebody before him, because clearly he has his list and he has it prepared like very well, and he's just checking off everything.
He tried his best. I mean, I think he was using like an encrypted device to try to pull off this communication. So it's not like he was lazy, but I mean, he got caught because he's not good at this shit, right? So maybe he should have just acknowledged that he's kind of inept at getting.
I don't even think if he was good at it, he would have beat Mueller, because Mueller doesn't seem like he played. That man seems like he thinks of any and every fucking thing possible. Like, again, he's Batman. He has a counter for everybody in the Justice League.
Fair enough. But I guess my point is the gamble would have made more sense if Manafort was established as a guy who actually was competent with this kind of thing. And I don't think he was. So maybe he should have acknowledged his shortcomings and not even bothered to try.
Yeah. Although, I guess like you said, with all those counts, fuck it. What's one more? It's like, that man is going to jail for at least 120 years if he's convicted of everything. So I guess it's like, shit, add another 10. Fuck it. Like, what is that going to do to me?
And I believe Trump's strategy here was to try and pretty much separate himself from this guy. Like, I mean, I'd never seen this guy. He was only on our shit for like what, 50-something days. I don't remember what his number was.
Yeah,
but it was
me kind of feel bad for him, and he's avoiding the whole, unlike other people, he's avoiding the whole topic of which you pardon this guy with that. So yeah, Trump is kind of separating himself from him.
That's what I don't get when everybody talks about, the loyalty of Manafort, or even what's his, oh my god, his lawyer's name, Cohen. Like those guys, like Trump has no loyalty toward you, and he'll sell you down the river the second it looks like it's the more convenient choice. So why bother?
Yeah, it's just like with Rudy Giuliani came out and was like, "Oh yeah, Michael Cohen would never flip," and then all of a sudden a day later, yeah, Michael Cohen is open to flipping. It's like, why wouldn't he be? Trump will only like protect you if he has no choice. Otherwise, like he'll separate from you as much as possible, and he won't even protect you if he has a choice. Like he'll just deny. He'll lie.
Yeah, he, he he doesn't give a shit about anything but himself, and that includes the country, unfortunately. But that is the fact. So I'm never sure why people seem to want to be on his side. He's not an ally you can trust at all. I mean, granted, I'm sure there's self-preservation reasons not to comply. Like everybody makes the jokes that maybe there's some Russians that want to kill Manafort, but that joke might not be very funny because it might be for real.
Yeah, no. I feel like Manafort is trying to be as staunch as possible, but I think this is going to break him. I think that's one of the reasons why Mueller wanted to make sure he acted on this in court. Once Mueller got Manafort to back himself into the trap that he want. I think because it's easier for me to sit there and deny and snipe when I can be just on house arrest and I can kind of have some type of freedom. Now he don't got no freedom at all. He's gonna get a taste of what it's like to have no freedom for a long time. Like, good luck in surviving just this stint, because again, we don't know when this trial is going to happen. This trial could actually take a couple of years to go down. Do you really think he's going to make it a couple of years sitting in prison waiting to see if he's going to go 120 more? Fuck no. I wouldn't. I'm sorry. If I knew that I could get sort of out of this situation by just going ahead and fucking flip, I'm doing it. Sure. I'm not taking 120 years for this man. There's no reason. And I'm not taking a gamble that this guy's gonna like do me a solid after I get jailed. Because if Manafort goes, pardoning him would be the stupidest thing Trump could ever do, because that's basically you admitting. Because Manafort is the key domino to this whole thing falling apart, in my opinion. Because of all the connections that he has within this thing. He is that top of the food chain guy that can break it all for Trump. And if you pardon this guy, everybody in the world knows you're truly hiding something. Like right now, we know you're hiding, but the pieces on the board that have flipped aren't big enough to him to be scared. But if that man flips, yeah.
I remember my mom talking about that too. This idea that he would try to pardon Manafort, and I just remember thinking, let me pose this question to you then. Let's say he tries to pardon Manafort. What does Congress do? Is that the moment?
And that's why I say this is where he's fucked, because they seem to be willing to put up with a lot and to take L's with a lot of that shit. You can't do this. If you got a guy who is proven to have worked willingly with a foreign governor to manipulate the presidency, and then U.S. Congress sit by with a blind eye and you're comfortable with that, that I don't care how much you are into the whole MAGA thing, I can't see you being able to come back and come in defense of them. Again, stranger things happen. Again, I didn't think people were stupid enough to vote the man into office to begin with. So I'm totally open to the idea that you can prove me wrong and that his ilk will accept that kind of a thing. But it's for Congress, you have nothing. To me, you have no weight, no legitimacy.
Yeah.
Like
I'm very curious about it because every time I think, this is going to be too much for them, they stay in line with the guy. So I'm I'm not confident that they will do what they're supposed to, and that will be a crisis in itself. But yeah, it's a very
yeah,
concerning, especially because,
yeah,
like a lot of people said, well, not a lot. I don't know about a lot of people, but people make the argument that you can't indict the sitting president, right? So you'd have to impeach him. So it becomes a political issue at that point more than a legal one. It's a little concerning to me. Uh, fucking hell.
but can you indict him? Because there's no law that necessarily says that. And it was
No,
stated by the Supreme Court during Nixon. If you remember, there is a judgment made by the Supreme Court that there is no law that says that you can't indict a president when they were going through this whole Watergate impeachment.
I don't think. I guess my point was just that it's an argument that people keep having right now, and there's at least some question slash doubt as to whether you can. So if for some reason it just goes to impeachment stuff itself in Congress, I think that's a little scary because it's not like Trump. Trump this far has been like almost politically bulletproof. Like once he has his base established, it's established, and he's been pretty much good no matter what he's done, right? So I find the thought of it scary, I guess.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see who stand and who doesn't, because we have a problem now revolving around Trump. To segue into that subject, so the immigration issue, where Congress has been going back and forth with the whole Dreamers Act and establishing new immigration laws and how to view this. All the while, Trump's been making these initiatives to have ICE round up people and detain them and things like that. And you have this whole storm now because part of his initiative is that children have to be separated from parents in the camps. So you have camps where the children are by themselves and the parents are somewhere else. And this is causing a lot of debate because a lot of human rights activists and civil rights activists are up in arms about this, and just people in general, from a morality standpoint, find it disgusting that he's, intentionally separating children and placing them in camps by themselves from their parents, which is traumatizing because you have a lot of little kids. It's not like they're older kids, teenagers, or anything like that. These are like toddlers, things like that, from all ranges of kids. But you have a lot of toddlers and, young kids in these scary detention areas without their family surrounding them. And, there's a huge outcry on this. Of course, Trump is coming out and blaming the Democrats, saying that they created the policy. Which, of course, is a bold-faced lie. Although the interpretation, of course, is, and he said it openly too. If he's even tweeted this, which again, how stupid are you to actually say this? Because you're trying to frame it like Democrats came up with some type of law, yet you're tweeting, all it would take is for Democrats to give me what I want, and we'll stop doing this. So it clearly isn't something that, as he had said before, he can't change. There's no executive order that can make this stop and whatnot. It's up to the Democrats to vote in a new law, and then it can stop. He's clearly proven that that's a lie, since he's leveraged this whole deal on getting his wall, basically. And a lot of people aren't happy. We just got recently Orrin Hatch, which out of all people, I would not have suspected him to be the voice of reason, come out and lead an initiative where he was trying to get Republicans to sign a document pretty much pleading with the president to stop his plan and allow them to work on a solution and stop the Separation of Family Act, to which I think at current time, including him, only 13 Republicans in the Senate have signed. And if you don't know the breakdown, there's 49, I believe, Republicans right now, somewhere around that in the Senate. So he pretty much couldn't even get a third of them to get on board with this. which is troubling. But what is your whole take on this ridiculous mess?
Oh man, it's just so much there, right? Like, first of all, the fact that he's using these kids as like political pawns to get what he wants out of them, that, to get his essentially his border wall, his stuff is really disgusting. The fact that he's just ignoring reality. He keeps saying the Democrat. You called it a policy, but his point is that it is a law that the Democrats gave us, and I guess that we have to enforce it. Because I think a lot of this hinges on the difference between a law and a policy.
Well, and that's the thing. There's no law.
No, there isn't. But that's what he keeps saying, is that there is a, well, however you wish to interpret that. He keeps saying that there is a law that they have to enforce, and I guess there are some laws in relation to this, but that's not really why this is happening. The reason this happens is because of that policy shift, not because just that
because,
law.
Okay, from what I understand, the law is that if people are illegally crossing the border, you're ordered to detain them and send them in detention. There's no separation of that. Generally speaking, they've always put families. It's kind of been like a not on the books that you have to, but a kind of like, yeah, this makes sense type of deal. If you're going to detain people crossing the border, you don't just split them up. If they're together, put them all in the same place. It's because who wants to split up people? But Trump came out and ordered them to split people, and he's not trying to acknowledge that.
Yeah. I mean, the issue there gets a little weird for me, but generally, it's odd to me that he keeps throwing this on him, and a few of the people in his administration keep throwing this on the Democrats in Congress when they're doing this on purpose. Sessions was the one that came out and said, we're doing this policy. If you come over with those kids, they're going to be separated. The whole point of this was to be a deterrence toward illegal immigration. And you can say that's right or wrong or whatever, but that was the point that you guys told us. That's why you were doing it. And then when it became unpopular, all of a sudden it was the Democrats' fault.
Well, see, part of it, though, too, is that it ended up not just being a quote-unquote deterrent to illegal immigration, because they're detaining people who are legally seeking asylum in this manner. So it's an issue of, is this about illegal immigration, or is this just you don't want these people here? Because there are people who officially requested for asylum that have been treated this way as well.
I saw one of them argue that they weren't doing that, but it becomes very hard to trust them. I remember one of those like representatives, one of Trump's guys, arguing that they weren't doing this to the people seeking asylum. I didn't quite know whether to believe that. I found him to be pretty disingenuous, and his story kept kind of shifting for me. But that is one of the things, though. Right? They take many stances. One is that it's the Democrats' fault. One is that some people are saying like, yeah, this is why we're doing it and it's good. And one is just that it's not happening like at all. Like, this isn't the policy. It's not a thing. Blah blah blah. So it's a little hard to keep track of, because they're not even unified on their stance about this. They pretty much just say whatever seems most convenient in that exact moment.
Yeah, and it's weird because, like, I feel like most of it is just silence that's worse than what what some of them are saying. Like, at least the people who are like giving, bullshit answers are saying something. There's way too many of them who are just sitting there and just not acknowledging, acting like this isn't a thing. And again, I hate to say this, but I commend Orrin Hatch for at least trying to implement some type of sanity into the GOP party. It's like fucking Orrin Hatch is the voice of reason, of the fucking, like, Orrin Hatch is a fucking like uber extra religious crazy like right wing motherfucker, and he's the voice of reason in all of this, and nobody's listening to
Yeah,
him.
I was about to say he's not a very effective voice.
He's one of their most storied members of the GOP right now. This man is about to retire, and they're probably going to sit here and send him off in grand fashion because this guy is a like big like deal within the GOP, and they're ignoring him. Like
So
he doesn't even have weight
I
on
mean, it
this.
doesn't shock me, and I feel like it illustrates something a lot of people have been ignoring, especially within the Republican Party, within the GOP, is that it's not your party anymore. You gave it to Trump because I guess you wanted to benefit from his crazy effectiveness, but you didn't stand up often enough, and now he owns the party. That's why he can do shit like, if he doesn't like a certain Republican candidate, he can shit talk them and stab their political career in the chest a bunch of times because you gave him too much sway over the base, which is part of the reason they're so afraid to stand up to him now, is because now they realize, like, yeah, he kind of owns this shit, and we better stay in line if we want to do shit.
Yeah, it's one of those things like I mentioned before about what was once now like what I thought was a begrudgingly admirable trait about the GOP, being that regardless of what it is, they will stand together in lockstep in order to get to where they want to be, to get their goal, which is to ensure that they control things in a lot of cases. And you know what? They kind of did that this time, and it's like this is the time that mentality seems to have truly backfired. It's like they tried to do it with the Tea Party thing, and yeah, did it work? No, not in the way that they wanted to, because Obama ended up being president. But in hindsight, it actually worked out well for them, because now we're seeing, like, once they go in lockstep behind a crazy agenda and they actually win because of this crazy agenda, look at the mess you're in now. You know, like, we thought Palin was fucking nuts. Look at this man's administration. And it's like you said, it's not their party anymore. It's the MAGA party. It's no longer the grand old party. It's the MAGA party. And the MAGA crowd has this weird fucking sense of isolationism, bigotry, racism, you know, way too much pride and way too much faith in America's power over others. And that's why you're getting a lot of these candidates like running scared. Like you just saw the senator from I forget if he was a Senate or House of Representative, but he had never lost an election in South Carolina. I forget his name. This man even survived the scandal where he was caught in a foreign country having an affair on his wife, and he still got reelected. This is how much this man was loved. But now that we're in the Trump era and he doesn't agree with everything that Trump's about, fucking all Republicans in the state of South Carolina said, fuck you to this guy who was their man for years and years, because he's
Mark,
not.
I know what you're talking about. Like, I was actually trying to reference him when I talked about Trump being able to stab your career in the chest.
Yeah, no, because he blew that man's career up. That man was unbeatable until Trump. And now he was beat, but not beaten by an opponent on the opposite side, but someone within his party. They're cannibalizing themselves.
And
man, they're killing each other.
Yeah.
Off.
And
now.
the woman who got the who got what he was shooting for, right? What did she say? This is the party of Trump. It was like one of the most chilling things I'd ever heard in my life when she said that shit. But it was like the perfect thing to say, because yes, that's the problem here, is that we keep talking about the Republicans and the GOP within that group, but that doesn't exist anymore. They're not like just these hyper religious, super conservative people. They're Trump's people. And too many of them didn't notice the takeover until it's too late.
Yeah, they were so silent during that election because they wanted to beat Hillary so bad that they did it. You know, what's the saying? There's a saying that came from oddly enough Jurassic Park, which is about to come out. But what's that saying that Jeff Goldblum said? You were so obsessed with finding out whether or not you could do this or not that you didn't stop to think whether you should. That's what this whole thing with Trump feels like. It's like they were so obsessed with seeing if they could take out Hillary and swing things back into the GOP's favor that they didn't stop and think, is this the way that we should want to do it?
I wonder if they learned the lesson yet.
Huh?
The sad thing is, I'm still not certain they've learned the lesson.
No, I don't think they've learned the lesson fully too. It's going to be, it's getting to, and it's funny because we're starting to see this happen from people who are looking from the outside in. We're starting to see that the effects are becoming all too real. Again, we just dropped out of the Human Rights Council. We're fighting with the G7. We're having all these tariff war clashes with major countries. We're encouraging other countries to jettison their liberal leaders. You know, you just had Trump the other day saying that, like, you know, Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, is failing because she's letting Germany overrun itself with immigrants. And you guys need to, like, get rid of her. That's why we're doing what we're doing, because we don't want to be put in the position that she's done, her country, which isn't true. Germany's not being overrun by criminal immigrants and things like that, but he's being able to frame it so he's rallying, like, other people in other countries. Like, you know, he's able to cheer on the people in England who are for getting out of the European Union and all of that stuff like that. And it's like he's fucking sowing seeds, not just here, but all over the place, for people to go back to a very, like, weird, hate to say it, but it's true, pre-World War II state with Germany and Nazism taking over.
What's that dude's name? I think it's like the or former CIA director or something like that. He tweeted out something that was comparing, you know, like the Holocaust imagery to that whole, you know, the shit happening at the border, and everybody just closed in on the fact that, oh, you can't compare shit to the Nazis. And he was making his point excellently, is that he wasn't comparing it to that moment with the concentration camps. He was comparing it to, I think he said, you know, he's not talking 1940 whatever, he's talking 1933, before that, when they were inching toward having this problem. When you had, you know,
that was the narrative. He kept saying, like, we can't let these Jews take over. The Jews and the Gypsies are causing this is why our economy is failing, and this is why we're struggling, because Jews and Gypsies are breaking the economy. That was Hitler's narrative. His whole narrative started off as, we're in a financial state crisis, and it's because of those people. And eventually, once he was able to consolidate his power, he was able to do, like, what he did with the Holocaust and things like that. But his whole point of being, his whole rise to power, was similar in the fact that his whole rhetoric was, the rest of the world, and in particular, these groups that we've allowed here, have ruined Germany on an economical level, and we need to take our country back from them. And that's how Hitler gained his, the same way Trump is gaining his steam, is by making this narrative about how everybody else is trying to fuck us and, like, make this country horrible. And it's up to us to take it back from them. Trump is doing the same exact thing. So no, it's a 100% fucking fair comparison. More importantly, if you don't want to use that, fine. Japanese internment camps, same thing. We had people who was living here legally, which some of these people in these entertainment camps now are here legally or seeking to live here legally, who were rounded up, taken out of their homes, taken out of wherever they were found, and put in these camps. because they were Japanese, and at the time, Japan did something bad, so we blamed all of them for what was going on because of what for Pearl Harbor. The similarities are too fucking scary right now. It's way too fucking scary, and I wish people would take it more serious because it is a serious thing. It's not a fucking joke. This shit is shades of like World War II stuff, like Trump crimes and atrocities.
Yeah, but I mean, the reason I brought that up was because everybody does what everybody always does when you compare something to something extreme, like the Holocaust or the Japanese internment thing. They're like, it's not like that. You're over exaggerating. They feel like you lose the second you compare one thing to something more horrific. And I love the dude's point was that you can't be so focused on the moment in history of extreme evil that you don't think about how they got there. They didn't just suddenly wake up and did something horrific one day, right? There was shit going on in their society over the decades that led to that. And if you're not careful, you're going to get there and not realize it just like they did. Because I think one of the things he said in one of those interviews was like, look at the Germans. They're, one of the most civilized, wonderful people or whatever. And even they managed to do that. His point was that you shouldn't assume that because you haven't really done it in a long time or ever that you're immune from certain problems.
Yeah.
Where's my water? Here we go.
It's dumb. Yeah, no, the lead up is the thing. It's the narrative that leads to the worst point. And I think people really need to pay attention to that. It was like, I know not a lot of people pay attention to history, and I know me, I'm way too much into World War II history, but that lead up, like reading about the time between post World War One and up to what's the year? I'm mad I'm forgetting the year. But it was like the late 30s when Hitler invaded Poland. This was, because a lot of people forget World War II wasn't just the 40s. He's kicked that shit off in the late 30s when he started like building his armies and then invaded Poland. And I think it was 38. And World War II went on at least 3 to 5 years before the United States even got involved. That's one thing that I find funny. Is it makes to your point about you're focusing on this stream because Americans tend to not think of World War II existing until December 7th, 1941, it seems, when Pearl Harbor happened. Because you forget that these countries were fighting for fucking like years trying to stop this madman where we just sat on the sideline until somebody touched us. And like this guy almost nearly conquered the world until Japan, woke us up to the problem, which I guess again shows how late America is. We always jump in when the damage is already done, and maybe that's sadly that's what's probably going to happen here too. Sadly, but
the damage is being done here. That's kind of
that's the problem. It's like the damage now is like immediately hitting us now, and we're still lumbering. Like to coin the phrase of FDR, or was it FDR who said it about Japan, how they have woken? No, it was General Tojo of Japan who said, we've just awoken a sleeping giant. Yeah. I'm afraid that by the time this giant is awoken, it's already going to be half dead. It's like it's not going to have the strength to actually fight the battle that it did back then. Because this shit is crazy. And then you have all these fools out here trying to defend it. Like, it's funny because I agree with this podcast I listen to. Sir Sanders is Goebbels.
Is what?
Goebbels. You don't know, again, this is World War II history, but Joseph Goebbels was the propaganda minister of Nazi Germany. Basically, he was the guy that when Hitler wasn't giving the speeches, he was the one giving the speeches about policy and laws and ethic and basically rallying the cause. Like, this is why you need to get behind Nazism and things like that. He was the guy, manufacturing and generating the message and sticking to Hitler's topic points, no matter what it was. It's been said that even he had reservations about some of the things that Hitler did and said, but he was so duty bound, he went ahead and did them anyway. Who does that sound like? That sounds like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who continually will spit this shit with no sign that she's bothered by this, no matter how outlandish it is. And it's like, yo, y'all keep trying to say we're being extreme, but that's a apt comparison, because Joseph Goebbels was the same type of person who, no matter what, he just went with what Hitler said and put that out there, and he stood by it. And it's like, I don't know how y'all can't see like all this stuff happening and not want to act. Even if you do like Trump, you have to see something wrong with like this. Because again, yeah, people gave themselves to Nazi Germany, and then you realize once you were in it, this ain't what we want. You get accounts all the time. Like most of these people who were fighting were like, I'm fighting for my life on both sides, because either I fight for my country out of love for my country, or fight for my country out of fear that I'm going to get killed if I don't do this. Yeah.
Sorry, what is that saying? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, or something like that. That everybody keeps throwing around nowadays. I mean, yeah, it does, I guess. It doesn't even rhyme. It's straight fucking plagiarism. So
yeah, no, it is, because like I've heard somebody make the comparison to ICE being the early stages of the SS, which was Hitler's basically secret police, which did things like rounded up Jews and people who they wanted to get rid of, Jews and gypsies, and deterred them, and kind of had no real established laws or reason to do so. It was just them taking orders and doing whatever the fuck they wanted. Like you see ICE captions of them pulling over people just because they look like they don't belong here, even though they've been born here, just because they look brown. That's what SS did. And it's like, yo, are y'all not paying attention? Did y'all not? I mean, I know history isn't the funnest subject in the world, but you might want to start reading some history books so you can get an idea of what's coming, because shit ain't pretty, and it's something that can potentially happen for real, not a joke.
Sure, but again, everybody always hears those comparisons and they're like, oh, they're too distasteful, and they just ignore it. Like, I mean, those comparisons, first of all, aren't always as far off as you want to think. But I just wish intellectually people would stop doing that shit. If this idea that if you compare anything to the Holocaust, you lose the argument because it was too extreme. An analogy is just a fucking analogy. It's as apt as it can be, right? It doesn't really matter what the analogy is. It's the basic point that it's wrong to do the shit that they are doing, right? So
yeah,
it's just one of the many tools people who support Trump use to try to avoid really having to deal with his issues, is to just say that the comparisons aren't fair.
Yeah, no. No, I mean,
and again, I'm not even that convinced that the comparisons aren't fair, by the way. I think that they are more fair than a lot of us want to accept.
And I think that's one of the problems. I think it's just harder to believe that this is actually something that's a possibility. So I think a lot of people do actually kind of see it. They just don't want to acknowledge it. It's kind of like you don't want to, your family member is a murderer. You don't want to acknowledge that because that's not what you believed in them for or what you care about them for. But in reality, it's like, yeah, they are, or they did something wrong. It's like you just don't want to believe that they're capable of things like that. And you know what? They're plenty capable. This man is plenty capable of a lot. Now, part of the argument for this whole situation made by his administration was that God said, what was the quote that Sessions said
Oh,
to validate the
from
law?
Paul, it was I guess it was just the idea that God, like, I don't want to say makes the laws, but I can't remember. I'd have to look up the exact quote.
Something about how God said that the law should be obeyed, basically, no matter what. It was sort of framed in that, and that was the excuse. Like, well, if this is a law, and God says you should pay attention to the law no matter what, well, who are you to complain? Because God told you respect and behave and follow the law, which is a bullshit line, of course, but brings us to our main topic of how people utilize religion to pretty much try to frame and dictate, or more importantly, excuse their behaviors and actions, especially when it comes to government behavior. It seems in general behavior, period. To be quite honest, because I remember that same passage was used as a clapback by Sean King of the New York Times, and I was just like groaning because it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. You know the exact framing of the words, and you're using it in a more proper, quote unquote, manner. But the idea that we're going tit for tat with like why our position is more viable is a very, very unhealthy thing. But I'm gonna like stop there and give you the floor, you heathen, fucking blasphemous piece of shit. And I'm just gonna let you wax poetic on why you feel all of this is some fuckery that we need to stop with. Which again, I agree, but I'm not gonna state it as eloquent or as passionately as you. So
I think the first couple of things that need to be addressed about that particular issue. I mean, I don't know if you just said it, but as many people have noticed, the verse that Sessions was referring to has been used to justify slavery, which is just strategically fucking stupid. But he did it, and it was awesome. I mean, second, we are a country based on laws, right? We're supposed to keep church and state separate, so you shouldn't really be trying to justify that shit with religious stuff anyway. Because I don't know if you know this, but not all of us are Christian, so that's a pointless argument to even make in the first place. It certainly wasn't convincing to me as an atheist, so I just think when we talk about that type of thing, we should keep the religious stuff out of it. Maybe that's unreasonable, but that is my stance. And I think that's the stance that the country has, at least in theory, had for a long time.
Well, it's funny that it's because separation of church and state isn't like it's something like a new value that came about in the United States government. This is something that was established straight from the beginning. Like our founding fathers clearly saw that there was possibly an issue with tying religion and governing in lockstep. So they went out of their way to ensure that, hey, we're not going to let the church dictate the actions of policy, which makes it very weird how religion has such an influence, on our government.
It does, especially when you hear people say that the founding fathers, essentially their argument is that the founding fathers made this a country of Christians or something, when most of them were quite against that entire idea.
Yeah.
Not necessarily Christianity itself, but the idea that it should be involved in governing. But I digress. I just did want to make those 2 points, was that, of course, the verse he used has a nasty history to it, and it shouldn't have been a relevant point to make anyway. And even the Sean King thing, because I remember you sent me that tweet, and my first issue with it was that he quoted a different verse. Oh, he didn't quote it, but he made a reference to it And then I went and read it and realized that he was misusing it anyway, which was just equally as stupid. Because I don't remember the exact. He said like Jesus said it would be, what was it? Somebody who harms a child should be have, I don't know.
Yeah, it was something about harming children.
Yeah, it was just his point. He thought it was like it would be better to like tie a rock to somebody and throw them in the ocean than let them harm a child or whatever. Which only with the vaguest of readings of that verse could you have possibly come to that conclusion. It was completely about not causing children to sin. And I won't get too deep into that verse, but I guess I can use that to catapult into the rest of this. People cherry pick the Bible a lot.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we only think of it as cherry picking when people use it to justify something terrible, like the way Sessions used it to justify this thing, or the way other people use it to justify slavery or hatred towards homosexuals, so on and so on. But I think even the positive things are just cherry picking too. Because you see guys like King, who, again, I argue if he did read that part of the Bible, I think he read it incorrectly, or he's using it out of context a bit. I saw plenty of other people point to other parts of the Bible that promote kindness and see, like, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. I think something you need to understand about the Bible is that it's not really coherent. You read a book, right? Say it's by a single author. You expect the ideas to be coherent because it was written by a single person, right? With some train of thought. So you expect things to not really be too contradictory in a single book. I know the Bible is a collection of verses and stuff, but let's call it a book, I guess. But the Bible and the Quran, as a matter of fact, holy text in general, aren't really like that. They're not coherent in that sense. They were written, over large periods of time by different people, so they tend to have things that are fairly contradictory in them. I think that's the first thing people need to realize is that those books are not like other pieces of writing that you're used to seeing, where you can just assume that everything is not contradictory in there. There's plenty of contradictory shit. If you want to find something to promote terrible ideas, it's not that hard to find in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. Same thing with the Quran. If you want to find an excuse to use violence, you can find them very easily in the Bible or Quran. And likewise, you can find examples of doing good shit. So my main point there is that when people play this game of the Bible says this thing that's bad or this thing that's good, it's a stupid fucking game because it does both things. It has terribly, terrible moral things in it, and it has some good shit too. So it's a stupid game to play. You can easily find both if you really want to. I don't know if you disagree with that, since you're super Christy compared to the dirty heathen like me.
No, I would not call myself super Christy.
I mean, you throw a blasphemer and heathen around here, so I figured you were.
Yeah, because you are. I mean, you're fucking like demonic soul. Like you, sir, encourage me to go against my Lord and Savior. Okay, that's how I'm gonna play. Yes, exactly. I strayed from the flock because of you. That's how I'm going to frame it. So
from the flock.
If I do have to like go to the gates of hell, I'll just say Cardiac did it, so he can send me up to pearly gates.
And I know
because he understands. He knows you're his spawn.
I know I harped on that point quite a bit, but it is one of those things that I'm just always shocked that people don't realize, because the abortion debate is a perfect example, right? You keep hearing people say that the Bible says X, and another group says that the Bible says Y. First of all, who gives a fuck what the Bible says, right? That's not how we should govern ourselves. But even if assuming you do care, you should acknowledge that you can use the Bible to justify pretty much any standpoint, because it's a clusterfuck of contradictory ideas. That's one point. Two, you need to acknowledge that religion itself is largely built on interpretation and faith, right? So if I interpret the Bible a certain way, then that's the way I interpret it, right? It doesn't really matter how you interpret it. That's one of the main issues with religion in general, is that it's based solely on faith and interpretation, not objective facts. So you can't really argue about it anyway, which is what makes me think that these arguments are a complete waste of time because they're not centered around any objective facts in the first place. So what's the point?
Yeah, it's funny because we've had this conversation before, and I kind of mentioned how part of my whole I don't have as harsh a stance, I guess I should say, quote unquote, because personally I don't think you're being hard or unreasonable. First of all, but I just say harsh because I guess the level of my opinion isn't as strong as yours. Maybe I don't know. That being said, part of my I don't know weird my whole acceptable understanding part is that I do believe that there's some things, some content within that book that can be used for good. And cherry picking doesn't bother me if it's in the sense that if you're just, I gotta say this, if it were just based on I just want to show you this thing that shows why you should do good to each other or be thoughtful and things like that, I kind of can accept. But too many times when we cherry pick things, it's not necessarily just to be well, let me tell you a story to relate why I think that, everything, the whole, if I was trying to comfort you and there was a story in the Bible that showed of a guy who was having trouble and he made it. Okay, that's the type of cherry picking that I'm kind of acceptable of. But too many times people use it to justify just their standpoint, not necessarily to be beneficial or to try to be encouraging and uplifting. It's generally just what I say is right, and that's because God said right here what I said is right, regardless of whether or not that's what God quote unquote that's what God meant when that was put in the Bible. You know what I mean? So I can definitely understand a lot of disdain, and I have a lot of disdain for religion because of that. Because while I've actually been to churches or I've known people who are religious, I have a former coworker who's a theologist who is a really stand-up dude. He's very, very open and understanding and willing to have he would be a good person for you to talk to because he wouldn't be offended by you whatsoever. He would actually have a real conversation with you and understand and acknowledge you because he has a lot of issues with religion and things like that. He has faith, but he definitely does have his his hangups and things like that, which it's kind of unique. It's kind of unique talking to this guy. At least from my standpoint, but that's neither here nor there. It's just too many times it's weaponized. Religion is weaponized by too many people. It's this gold standard of how you control people's thoughts, the conversation, however you want to put it for them. And that's the problem. That's the biggest problem, at least for me, is again, it's just any book or any story that you tell someone, you could take that and you could try it. You can be, use it as just well, this is a good story to kind of be encouraging and lifting, but people want to take it as and make it their tool of manipulation. And religion, that's the heart of religion. It's a tool of manipulation that I don't appreciate at all. So it's yeah, I could be that person who might believe that there's something out there the way I am, but I have no use for religion whatsoever. Like, and I know it pisses off a lot of people that I know when I say stuff like that. But
Asshole.
yeah, I guess I am kind of an asshole in that sense because, yeah, no, it's so hard for me to take religion as a thing serious, knowing the things that people do or how they use it. It's like it's something else. I know there's something out there that is not religious based, but I look at it the same way, and I'm trying to think if I can think of it. It's just like, all right, so the whole gun thing is a good is another good place to where people use the gun law and weaponize it as a reason for why everybody should have a gun. Um, Simply because if there's criminals out there, you need to protect yourself. You need a gun. That's the only way you can handle these people. They don't think about the practicality that maybe if we had less guns and less access to guns, people wouldn't have to feel that way. But it doesn't like that doesn't register. Same, I think those two things kind of like run into each other because it's like you're taking what you want from it and you're just basically using it to push it and force it upon everybody else and to manipulate people's thoughts. And I don't appreciate, like me personally, I've never appreciated being manipulated. And I think that's my disdain for religion. It's just too manipulative. There's too much going on where everybody has some type of motive to gain some way, whether it be to get you to obey laws, whether it be to get you to fill up the collection place and buy the fucking pastor a new goddamn Mercedes or whatever. It's yeah, it religion disgusts me. It really does disgust me. Um, but for some reason, it has not disgusted me to the point of atheism, which I find weird.
I think what's weird is like, how should I put this? I find myself less disgusted than you, which, in a certain way, because how should I describe this? My disdain is not just around the way it's used, because you talk about how religion can be weaponized and is weaponized, obviously, as it was by Mr. Sessions, which spawned this conversation. But lots of ideas can be weaponized. Political ideologies, certain philosophical ideas, racism, like lots of ideas can be weaponized. My issue with religion is that I think it's also a set of ideas that can be weaponized, but I think it's by its nature, it's particularly vulnerable to being weaponized in a way that the other ideas aren't. And like I said, lots of ideas can and have been weaponized, but I think religion in itself, just the way it's structured, is more prone to it. And it's because of how it has to be used, right? I keep harping on the idea that it's purely faith-based. It's a matter of interpretation and all that, because I think that is really what makes it super dangerous. Is because once somebody has a certain interpretation of a religion, you can't really tell them that they're wrong, because it's not really based on any objective argumentation or fact or anything like that. Like if somebody says, black people are lesser, you can objectively tell them that they're wrong because there's no biological truth in that. But it's not as easy with a religion because it's a religion. It becomes a much harder task to even make the argument. So I feel like a lot of people think that I just have a disdain for like the idea of a god or just even the way religion is used, which my problem is further at the root of what religion is, faith and interpretation. I think that just makes it a more potent problem than other ideas are. So I think the nature of my disdain is a little different.
And I think that part of it is too. I just sat here and thought about it. I think part of it is that, yeah, while I always say I have no use for religion or I have no belief in religion, I think part of my the reason why I would have more disdain or more distaste for religion for you is that somewhere I still believe in like certain constructs that revolve around religion. As far as, like I said, the fact that this can be a useful tool to help people like feel good. Like you can, like, I'm not saying like you need to like believe everything that's in the Bible, but it's just that some of the more positive things you can use to help people like understand why they shouldn't give hope, why they shouldn't like stop believing in you know positive things coming their way and things like that. I'm not saying they need to, like most people try to do, quote unquote, give themselves to God or anything else like that. But I do think that there is like this fabric within religion, or like I think with certain storytelling philosophies and things like that, where you can, if you choose to use this thing that people are kind of into to help them be better people or to feel better about themselves, I'm more for it. I'm more all for positive reinforcement and things like that. And something that can help, like, whether or not I believe it's true or not, if it makes you like, if it can encourage you in some way to start down that path, and then you take that and you develop it on your own and become that better person, fine. It's kind of like how I have this disdain, like as someone who makes content on the internet, on YouTube, I have a serious problem with content creators. I fucking have like a lot of angst towards content creating as a whole because of how people manipulate it to just generate money and play with people's emotions and opinions and feelings. The whole clickbait type thing. Doing stupid reaction videos just because that's what's going to get people to watch you, and even though you don't care about whatever you're reacting to, and things like that. That bothers me because I have this belief that content creating can be a very positive source of information and conversation for people. Like, the videos that I do, like the commentary about life and all that, I try to impart, stimulate some type of conversation that maybe will help someone get through something. Like, that's my thing. It's not about just getting paid to make the stuff. I wanted to like do something that's beneficial to society. And I guess that's why I have the huge disdain, because it's like there are pieces of religion that can be used that way, but you fucking it up because you're just using it for selfish and like ridiculous reasons. And I think that's why I have so much emotion to it. Like, you seem to be more of the like, this makes no sense, and I want you to explain to me why this makes no sense. Where I'm more of, why aren't you using this thing for this? And I guess that's why my anger comes up, because I see the potential in like how it can be beneficial, regardless of how nonsensical it can seem. And that hurts me more than just teaching people nonsense. I guess. I don't know. It's a weird thing. But I think that's my whole drive and passion. It's just like, yeah, it just bugs me. It really bugs me.
A lot of people, bring up the idea that, especially to me, since they know I'm not religious, and fuck, even a lot of non-religious people bring up this point, is that even if religion isn't true per se, or you don't believe it, you could at least acknowledge the potential for good that it has, which I do, I suppose. But hold on, should I put this? I think one thing to think about is, simply because you can get good something good from it, does that make it the optimal way to get something good? Because it's not like I've never acknowledged that you cannot get something good from the Bible. Like, a lot of people always bring that up to me, and I'm just like, but I've never said that you couldn't pull something good from the Bible. I've never said that it couldn't be used for comfort and all that stuff. One of my main arguments is that yes, you can, but it's not really a good way to do it because it comes with too much other baggage. There's a, and again, you see it weaponized the way it is. I think the things people get from religion, like sense of community, a sense of being loved, all that stuff, is not best gotten from religion. I think you can get it from there, but simply because you can does not mean it's the only place to get it or even the best place. Again, because there's just so much other baggage attached to it that becomes hard to avoid. Grab that water. Were you about to say something there?
No, I mean, because I kind of I wasn't going to say anything, but to your point, yeah, I totally understand that. Because again, I don't think it's necessarily the best way, but again, if it can get you to start down that path, like I don't think anybody should just say like the whole I only became a good person because I found religion to me is not necessarily the best thing. I mean, again, I'm happy that this took you there. Let's just not dismiss the fact that this maybe have gotten you on the path, but acknowledge the work that you did as a person to realize that, hey, I should be a better person. Like, I don't think that you should just give it all to like, well, I found God and that's why I'm good. Because to me, when you do that, you're just saying like, I wouldn't have done this if it wasn't for this thing ever. Whereas,
sure, but some of them do mean that for real, though.
Yeah, that's one of my issues because I see people like that all the time. It's like I'm this better person. I was like, okay, so when I hear that, my immediate reaction is you're lying to yourself because if all of what you do that is considered good is all based around because I'm a part of this thing, as soon as you get something to kind of like divert you from that thing, how soon are you going to go back to your old ways? Like, are you acknowledge that you're a better person, period? Not that you're a better person. Like, you can say, yeah, if I didn't like have a discussion with a pastor, I wouldn't have come to, maybe a revelation that I need to do better. Don't just say, because I've joined this flock, that this is why I'm good and this is why I'm going to maintain my goodness. Because that, to me, yeah, no. Because once something happens within that quote unquote flock to dissuade you, nine times out of 10, the person is going to just is like, well, I might as well go back my old way. It's like, it's kind of like a drug. The drug makes you feel like certain ways. And then when you're finally off the drug, like, and you're free of the drug, you feel like, okay, cool. But it just takes you like this one thing to knock you back on that drug. For some people have the conviction of realizing like, I really don't need this thing. And some people just find ways to pretend like they don't want to be on there. And I feel like religion can be that pretend. I'm not trying to be a part of this. When in reality, like as soon as you can, you're going to bounce back.
Yeah, but I guess even that thing about, using religion as a means to start on that path, even that doesn't really bother me all that much. I've heard people say that I've had this big issue with the Bible or whatever, even though the Bible helped them do something good. Fine, but the point I always make is, say I read The Cat in the Hat when I was like 8 or something, and it changed my life, and it made me. I should have chosen a not a child's book because that makes it seem like what I'm about to say is derogatory or something. But whatever, it's a well-known book. Let's say I'm 8 years old. I read The Cat in the Hat. It changes my life for some reason. It makes me super good, awesome. I'm sure a lot of people would say like, well, why can't you do that with the Bible? I think the main difference is that I don't really believe the cat in the hat is real. So it doesn't have any extreme impact on the rest of my life. And I think that is an extreme difference with the Bible is that it's not just like a book where you read some stuff that inspired you. Well, for some people it is. It depends on how religious you are, I guess. But it's not just like any old book where you just read a story and you're like, oh, you learned this good lesson from it. People see it as the word of God, and that has a major impact on the way that they conceive of that book, which of course has a major impact on their behavior. So I think, like, yes, I can see how it can start somebody's journey into more positive realms, but I tend to see it as still fairly dangerous because of that fact. Just had something pop up on my screen here.
I guess to use a drug analogy, it's like, yeah, you can start to use this as a thing, but you might want to get off before you become truly addicted and lose sense of self. But I think that's what happens with a lot of people when it comes to religion. You lose sense of self. Of course, that being said, I think a lot of what we hate when we hear people using religion and weaponizing it isn't that these people are truly like into it, because I honestly don't think that most of these people that you hear use these religious things like Jeff Sessions are truly religious. I think they kind of like, I think the other half of the hate for religion comes in. I think a lot of people know the power of religion because of how it can influence those who, I hate to say it, but are naive enough to kind of, you know, follow blindly when someone brings up religion. Like, how can I put this? I guess it's like if for some people, if you use religion quotes, religious quotes and things like that to make your point, because they're so quote unquote addicted to the drug of religion that they become more attentive and responsive to you, because it's like, hey, he's speaking my language, so to speak. He's talking about the things that I'm really, really into. It's kind of like, again, going back to the content creator thing, how you can manipulate the landscape by just, hey, everybody's watching reaction videos. Why not I do reaction videos too, and I'll get views. It's like, well, people are really, really into religion, so if I spit a religious verse, they immediately side with me because clearly I'm on the side of God in their mind. So, even though I could probably care less, because honestly believe one of the things about religion, again, that bothers me is that a lot of people, when I speak about weaponizing, I'm not just talking about just people who are faithful using it, just people who just recognize that there are people who will buy whatever I say as long as I frame it
Sure.
in that way. And it's like with Sessions and people like that, it's like, he's not, I mean, sure, or most politicians, I believe most politicians are kind of, numb when it comes to religion. It's just a tool in their box to use to gain, their position.
He might believe. He might really believe it. I guess one of the difficult things when you talk about religion is that people are religious to varying degrees, which is something that I care about a lot, but I feel like a lot of religious people don't notice because I hear a lot of people who will say, I'm Christian, but if I was to really press them on specific beliefs, they would at best be agnostic. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if I press, because a lot of people will use it. Even I, actually, a lot of people don't know this.
And I don't even think they're agnostic, to be honest.
Some of them, I think, have been outright atheists, but I think a lot of them have been at least agnostic. And I think part of the issue is that a lot of us grow up in religious families. So even me, for a long time, I called myself a Christian, not because I believed in Christ ever. Like I never did that. I happened to grow up in a family that was Christian, and it was just it was kind of like saying, we're Jamaican. Like it was not something I really thought that much about. So I feel like there's a lot of people who will call themselves Christian and not be Christian in the sense that they are a follower of Christ or have read the Bible and blah blah blah. So I think it muddies the water of religion a lot because one person's Christian is not even close to another person's Christian. You know what I mean? Which also makes it difficult to talk about with religious people because say you're dealing with somebody who's just more on the agnostic side. They're calling themselves Christian, but they're floating somewhere out in this. Like if you press them, they just believe in some vague spiritualism. For them, I don't think shit in the Bible or like Christianity really holds very much sway in their day to day life. And whatever impact it does have is generally positive, right? So they don't tend to notice just how dangerous true belief in the actual word of the Bible can be because likely they've never really read it before. They just have some vague memories of like going to church and hearing a pastor or preacher talk about it. And of course they're maybe cherry picking or interpreting quite willfully there. I think one of the things we really do acknowledge when we talk about religion, and maybe I should have started with this, is that I personally acknowledge that when I'm talking about it, that not everybody is religious in the same way, and it makes it really fucking confusing because when I'm talking to those of you who are religious and aren't like reading every single word of the Bible and trying to live by holy laws, and depending on what your religion is, I can see why to you it seems like my disdain for religion is quite irrational because for you it doesn't really have much impact, and the impact it does have is pretty positive, right? You might go to church sometimes, which gives you a sense of community. You see a Bible quote every once in a while.
I
That's pretty
honestly don't have
positive.
any disdain for what you feel. I actually
No, like it doesn't bother me. So
no, but I have no seriously, honestly. I joke with you with the whole heathen thing and all that, like, but in reality, I tend to agree. I actually agree with you 100%. Again, it's just like I know I have this belief that there's something out there. I would say like again, the only thing that I would maybe disagree with you is that people probably if you need to if this is something to be a catapult to you to opening up to the idea of like maybe I just need to be a good person. I'm with that, but I don't think I actually disagree with you because
but
I
even that,
have to
like, I don't
say,
think I disagree too
I
much with
am
you on that.
probably that person who you say is more agnostic. And that's probably the reason why I say I don't think they're agnostic because I say that knowing that I'm not necessarily agnostic because for me to be agnostic is not just you believing that there's a higher power, but you believe that there's some truth to religion. And I have to tell you, I don't believe there's much truth to religion at all. Like I can't think of anything concrete that if you pointed out in the Bible and you said, "Don't you think this is real?" that I couldn't question. Like the only part of religion that I can get with is the idea of a higher being. And you notice how I always refer to it as a higher being. I don't say that I believe in God. I'll say it to some people, mostly religious people, because I know that's their frame of reference. And but I've said this before, me personally, the title God is that just a frame of reference for the higher being in my mind.
Sure.
Because it's a common term that people relate to more than just saying a higher being. So that's why I say I don't necessarily believe a lot of people are agnostic either, because I just think they believe in this higher being. But as far as the tenets, the merits of what goes with that, yeah. A lot
Sure.
of
I
us
mean,
kind of like, yeah, no. That's why,
I guess
like,
that
I just
determines.
don't have a problem. Like, I fuck with you just because I'm an asshole. You know that. Let's be honest.
But what I guess I wasn't referring to you particularly. The point I was making is that when I talk to people who at least claim to be more religious, they get somewhat offended because I think they're pushing How should I put this? They seem to be misinterpreting what my disdain is about. So, because again, in their lives, because they're, and maybe I shouldn't have used the word agnostic because it still doesn't feel like quite the right fit for what I'm trying to get at with the people who are more vaguely spiritual, let's say. Again, in their life,
And
whatever religion
not
they
to interrupt you, but I think that's the proper term because that's the term that I tend to use myself. I think you're spiritual because you believe in a spirit or something, again, higher being, and again, spirit is a good term of reference for it.
sure. But I see these people who are more like that, yet they have at least some tie in the religious community, either because their family goes to church and they go as well. So, from their point of view, I can see why they would think that me attacking religion is just me being a jerk, because from their frame of reference, there's nothing really all that negative about it. They have this community set up that gives them a sense of purpose. It helps comfort them when things get rough, so on and so on. And I look at that and I think, I think a lot of you guys just don't really know what it's like to be actually religious, which I know is a statement that might piss people off. But, for example, when they say, how can you be Christian and believe in something so horrible like what Sessions said, or shit about like abortion or hatred of homosexuals and so on and so on and so on. When I look at that, I think, yeah, I can see why you don't understand how they could do that, because I don't think you fully grasp what it is like to truly believe what they say they believe. They're not. How should I put it? Like you said, you use the term God simply for convenience with people who believe in, the Christian God, right? I feel like a lot of other people are doing that too, but they're not conscious of the fact that they're doing it like you are. Like, they'll use the term God in the Christian sense, but I don't think they've really thought very hard about whether they believe Christianity. They never really read the Bible. They don't know if they believe that there was a flood, a biblical flood, if God created the earth in 7 days. They don't think that hard about that stuff. So they associate with terms like Christian or Muslim or whatever, but I don't think they've thought super hard about very specific things before. So for them, Christian just means like this vaguely positive force, whereas for people who are, I hate to be a dick, but I would call them more genuinely religious, they're reading very specific parts of the Bible, and sure, they may be cherry picking, I guess, but I know it's a difficult thing to explain, but I would have religious people question how religious they really are in practice. Do you consult the Bible when you're about to make a decision? Do you look to it for like legal advice or anything like that? How do you use the Bible in your everyday life? Do you use it at all? Have you ever read it before? And if you did, do you buy most of the stuff in there? Right? Like, because there's always this weird, like, how could a Christian person do this? And from my standpoint, I'm never really shocked, because I don't think I've read the entire Bible, but I've read enough of it to not be that surprised when I see certain things, because I can see where they get it from. I can think of a verse or two where it's like, yeah, I can see why you would interpret it that way and start doing that shit.
Yeah, but a lot of times it's just not. Again, it's a matter of convenience, in my opinion. Again, that's one reason why it's not a big deal to me to be religious, because I feel like Donald Trump is a perfect example of someone who claims to be a Christian, but it's like, okay, so let's go through the list of commandments that you have broken. Gluttony, yeah, you ain't with that, clearly. Honor thy father and thy mother. You hated your dad because your dad hated you. Clearly, you don't honor your father. So, yep. You know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Ooh. Gee. Do you think he follows that one?
If he's a masochist, I suppose.
Exactly. It's just like you have those things between the sins and the commandments. This man fucking like written. Most of us do that. It's like, yo, I cannot sit here and try to preach to you about certain things, knowing that I do. One of the biggest things is sex. A lot of people like to talk about, like, again, we love to, I say we, but I mean Christians love to come harsh down on homosexuality and how much of a sin it is and how it goes against God. There is a fucking, problem with Christianity with premarital sex too. But
Sure.
I don't see a lot of these motherfuckers like harping on each other like they may have done years ago about this shit. It's like you hate gay people, but you watch porn. Bruh, you're using Christian tenet to say why gay people don't. Do you really think it's a Christian thing to watch two non-married people fucking, or to fuck someone that you're not married to? Because that's part of the Christian stable is to, be chaste and be true and virtuous until you find that one person.
I mean, I would argue that they probably don't know that, but sure.
No, but you can't avoid, if you're someone who considers himself a serious Christian, and I can tell you this from experience, you know this from the time that you're 12, because if you've ever been to a Sunday school when you were that age, they start teaching you that stuff. Why? Because generally speaking, around that's the age when your hormones start to pop. To be quiet, that's generally when they assume that everybody started to grow into their adult bodies and
fucking everybody.
and that's the way of stopping you from imbibing in that part of sin. They tell you that. I mean, I'm not lying. They tell you the shit, like, of how you're supposed to like do this and all that. It's like, part of it too, I think, was at the time when I was had to go to the Sunday school. Thank God my mom was like, you didn't have to go after a while. Love you, Mom. But
You would have been
I think part of it was like kind of like the church's clapback on the fact that sexual education at that time was becoming something that they had pushed and eventually allowed in schools. Like, I had sex education in the 6th grade. And of course it was, what was that?
Them fucking with education and science. That is something I can't tolerate.
But that was something that they really, really hated, because this was like the early stage of sex education. And it was a big controversy that they had us talking about this. And, people railed against that. And, I had sex ed again in high school because I think at one point, this area, they kind of stopped it from being early. So they wanted you to have it at least in high school, or they made it mandatory in 6th grade in high school, something like that. I forget how it went, but that was a big issue at the time, even though the people who advocated, and I look back and, you think about it, it's like, they were really smart to do this shit. They made a point. It's like, look, how kids are. You've been through this. Hell, again, my mom had a kid at the age of 14. You can't stop hormones from happening. Things happen like that. And that's the weird thing that I find weird, that people railed against sex ed back then, was because the previous generation, my mom's generation, were generations where you had a lot of young parents coming from. Like, my oldest sister, my mom had, like, she got pregnant when she was 14, had her when she was 15. And you had a lot of that. Like, a lot of us from this generation had that happen a lot. But it's like, well, what if you would have had sexual education and kind of let people know what's going on, and at least give them responsibility? It's like, shit, I'm glad you taught me how to use a fucking condom in the fucking, like, 10th grade. You know what I mean?
It is the odd thing, but I think we need to recognize what the goal is there, right? It's certainly not for the well-being of people. It's not to prevent they have a moral stance against sex itself, and that's what they really care about. They don't really care about health issues or preventing childbirth until the parents are ready and willing and all that stuff. That's not really their goal. So it never really surprises me when they do things that are not optimal because again, I recognize what the point of what they are doing is. So yeah, I think sex education. I shouldn't say I think it is a matter of fact. Sex education is a more effective means of ensuring people's well-being than trying to push abstinence. We've seen that as a
Real
matter of
quick,
fact. What's
you took sex ed, right?
uh something? Yes,
Did
some
you
sort
have
of
to
sex
get
ed.
permission?
I don't remember, but I
Because that
also
was
don't remember the sex ed being particularly good. So
well, no, because that was a big thing too. It's like when it first was introduced, like I said, we had it in sixth grade. I actually had to bring a permission slip home, and my mom had to agree to it. That's how sex ed started. They wouldn't just do it. You had to get permission. If you didn't get permission, you were separated from the class when it was taught.
I think you were allowed to have like a waiver or something so that you didn't have to take it. Which at the time I guess I didn't really understand, but I guess it makes sense now. It was probably for religious reasons.
Yeah, no, but for me, it was like your parent had to agree to allow you.
Sure.
Like maybe the waiver thing changed. I think in high school it kind of became your choice because it was still a permission slip. Your parents still had to allow you. You didn't have any say on whether or not you wanted to learn or not. If your parents didn't want you to learn during that whole portion of like the class, like in elementary school, it was just a part of the curriculum, but in high school, you were required to take health ed here, and if you weren't allowed during that period of time, you were kind of separated to the class from the class and given like different assignments, which thankfully I don't think anybody in my class their parents said no to it. Um, but I could see that happening in some places because, and why I have the hiccups, I don't know. That hurts. But yeah, some people would withhold their kids from that period of schooling
Those
because
were
of
the
that.
pregnant kids. Uh,
Oddly enough, they probably were because there were a couple of people that got pregnant that probably didn't exactly
what the hell
educate.
was a condom? But hop back for a second. You had mentioned using the religion as a starting off point. Again, I think part of my issue is that I could acknowledge that you could use it as such, but I don't think you should. And I mentioned the baggage, but more than that, even the base stuff about at this point I'm talking about Christianity, I guess, but I would say the same thing about Islam and Judaism. Even some of the base shit that a lot of people take for granted as good is not really good. So, what's a good example as like something really central? Yeah, like the idea of Jesus, dying for your sins. What was the sin? Are we talking about the original sin caused by like Adam and Eve? Because if so, you're saying that pretty much every person following those two inherited their sin and that it had to be cleansed, right? I mean, that is not morally good, and I think everybody now knows that because saying that we shared in their sin is like saying if I go and kill somebody and let's say I have a child, if I go and kill somebody, they should throw the kid in prison with me. That doesn't make any sense. That's not moral at all. And I feel like the very central thing about Jesus is admitting that problem is that if he had to die for your sins, you are admitting that you had a sin to begin with that probably shouldn't have been on you. There's very basic, central, fundamental stuff that everybody takes for granted as good in some of these religions that I would ask them to rethink it because I don't think those things are good. I think you've just been told they are good and you've just kind of accepted that. 'Cause I see some people like reference stories from the Bible and I'm like, what the? It's not really good per se. And I feel like if you read that story outside of the context of the Bible, you wouldn't think of it as good.
Yeah. No, and again, I understand the flaw of my feelings for that, because when I say that, I tend to remove the go to church to start this part when I say that. Like I tend to kind of maybe romanticize it in that you will find this person, this random person, who will show you the the good stuff and not necessarily pin you down with the, again, he died for your sins. If you don't do this, he's going to be mad at you. Like the general way that religion is taught. Yeah, it just shows how I have this disdain for religion, because I feel like this should be taught to you by just this individual who has possibly read the Bible and just understands the good parts and separates the bad parts and is willing to impart on you the good part type thing. Like, it's my naivety in that hopes that maybe you can gain this knowledge from a more desirable or more understandable source.
I mean, I think you could do it, but I think in order to do it, you would have to be. I would say that the contents of the Bible would have to be filtered through somebody who's intentionally picking the good parts, which I guess is my point. Is, say you want to teach a child, I don't know, to be more Jesus, like, I guess, to share. I guess my argument is you can use other books that don't have as much bad stuff in them, or even just make up a different story. Like, because again, my issue goes to the root. I do think that the Bible itself has a lot of issues. So I think if the source material is really the problem. I do think there are preachers who use it as a sense of, in a way, to manipulate, but I do think that the source material lends itself to manipulation. And I do think, for any given thing you want to teach somebody, there are many, many, many other books that you can
but
use.
See, that's the problem. Like, I'm sure if it were someone like me, I could quote unquote manipulate it in a way that I think would be beneficial. But too many people kind of like the Bible.
Okay.
But I feel like too many people, and that's the problem with religion. That's one of my biggest problems with religion. Too many people manipulate it to get you to where they want you to be, and not necessarily help you get to where you want to be. Sure. Like any story, any philosophy, you could take and you can interpret it and you could use it for however you want to. Some people will take it and go in bad ways. Some people will take it and go in good ways. But religion just seems to be that one thing that I guess there's too much of a consensus way of how it should be done that makes it harder for it to be used as a sensible piece of material. Because the general populace, when it comes to religion, all feed to one way, no matter what religion it is.
Sure, there's major commonalities, despite all the different branches there are.
Yeah,
they share a lot more than I think they wish to admit.
Yeah, definitely. It's just like, sure, you say you repent on your deathbed because you're Lutheran, but the majority of base Christianity, which you claim is false, are the backbones of your your whole divinity. So it's like, yeah, it's just that one thing that rankles you that you can't fucking repent. And I say this all the time. This is another reason why I find religion bullshit, especially Christianity, because you look at all these different branches. Again, Lutheran, one of their biggest things is purgatory. They don't necessarily believe in that shit, and they believe in repenting. So basically, you can do whatever the fuck you want, but hey, I'm sorry, God, and that absolves me. What is it? I think it's Episcopalian. Part of the reason that became a divinity is because fucking Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce from the Pope's niece, and he needed annulments to be in play. So he wanted to go and marry and kill other women in his life. You know,
Don't we all?
but it's just like, you know, it sounds funny, but that shit is true. That's part of why this shit is invented. And it may not be Episcopalian, it may be Presbyterian. I forget which one. I always get them mixed up. But part of it was, yeah, this motherfucker didn't want to like fucking like have to deal with the Pope. So he fucking came up with the way where, okay, I'm not gonna kill you. I'm just gonna pretend this didn't happen. And that will please him. So he'll get the fuck off my back and I can do whatever the fuck I want. It's like a lot of, if you look at like a lot of these different divinities of Christianity, a lot of their like reasoning comes behind somebody's selfish want in Christianity. Like they couldn't take the base like form of Christianity to their advantage, so they fucking tweaked it to their liking.
Why not engineer a better religion?
Yeah.
You know what? I mentioned other stories you could use to teach people certain things. I think I'm going to take that back. I don't think you even really need stories to do it. I think you can just explain certain things. Like there's been, changes in the way I look at certain issues. Not because I read like a story per se, but because I read like an essay or an argument or something, right? Like I don't think a lot of people think about it enough, but you can argue quite well for moral righteousness in an objective manner. It's not really that hard. So I do acknowledge that stories can be useful, especially for like kids and stuff, but just general things like, I don't know, don't murder anybody. You can just make objective arguments for why you ought not do that. So yes, I think you can use other stories that are less baggage filled than the Bible. I think I take it a step further and say you could really just explain those points by themselves. Again, I don't think that works equally well with everybody all the time, especially the young, but it is.
And I guess maybe that's why I say it's a good starting point, because it's like fables to me. We kind of use fables and stories to teach our children like right and wrong, because I guess in a child's mind it's easier to grasp that way. But yeah, I do feel like at some point you should stop doing that shit and just be like, okay, let me talk to you like a human being now.
I don't think most people will do it because, like, again, I don't think they think about the fact that morality and ethics and all that stuff are a set of ideas, and as such, you can talk about and argue about them separately from any religious book or any story or anything like that. Like, you can just, I mean, if you read into a lot of philosophy papers and shit like that, there are arguments about them. They exist. It's an objective field you can look at. In general, you can just talk about it divorced of everything else. So I do think, I think this is part of the reason I'm less inclined to accept religion as a jumping off point. Not because it can't be effective. I just don't think it's even that useful in comparison to the other things.
Yeah, and sadly, you have too many examples as to why it's not, because of, again, how people use it and how it's been dictated to us. Like, because, yeah, religion is...
I think a lot of us have grown up with it in our lives, which I think is part of the issue, is because a lot of us are not shitty people. I hate to admit that not everybody's a complete dirtbag, and they grew up with religion around them, so I don't think they're like, well, I grew up with this and it worked out, so it's all good, right? But
yeah, no, because
random question.
Let's just old grandma. Like, my grandmother was such a religious person, but my grandmother is also the example of like that religious person who kind of beat religion into you, and then when you found out things about her past or you saw some certain things that she did, it was like, wait, you're fucking railing me on these things, and you've got spotty history, yet you're a churchgoer and you're a Christian now, and I'm a fucking heathenist child. that you just like wailing on me with the religious tenet. And it's like, part of it with that growing up with religion is that you're so clobbered over the head, especially, I would say, especially in Black communities, which, again, for the love of me, is the most confusing thing, considering that religion was a tool to manipulate us into believing that we were lesser beings to begin with.
It's not
That
confusing. It was effective.
Huh?
It's not confusing. It was just really effective.
No, and that's the thing. It's like they use religion to subjugate us, yet we're so fucking into the church as a community, which boggles the mind at times. But it's just like, again, my grandmother was just really, really extra with it in some ways. And I've noticed at a younger age, I was able, and probably that's why I'm able to have the opinions I have now. I started noticing at a young age, it's like, yo, grandma, as religious you are, like the way that you're beating me is not that godly. Like, or things like that, or certain things she would say. And we were like, wait, like, this is what God was, no. Like, this is like cool. So
I think it sounds pretty godly. I think it depends on what part of the Bible you're talking about. I've seen God be very vengeful in the fucking Bible.
I guess. I don't know.
Yahweh
it's just like,
is
I think I
not
told you
fucking
this
around.
before, how we were taught to be quiet during storms because God was talking to us by my grandmother. Things like that. Like, I look back at that, I was like, really?
I didn't get that one, but fair enough.
Yeah.
Those
no,
are the
like,
ones I heard.
like, yeah, I told you, so that one, the whole, like, if it's raining while the sun is out, the devil's beating his wife. It was like so pretty crazy things. I look back now that kind of broke me of religion more than it adhered me to it when I think about it. Because it's like, no, that don't make no sense. Like, the devil's beating his wife because the sun is out while it's raining. What? Where did the devil's wife come from? I didn't know the devil was married. Like,
I need to go check that part in the Bible.
Yo, please find that for me. But there's a lot of things. Again, this is a Black community thing because I've heard this from several Black people. That's the thing that makes it funny to me. It's like our adherence
outside of your family.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess I just assume that originated in your family because
it originated in my family, but I actually heard other people in their neighborhood refer to it. So it's like it's a weird thing. Like, yeah, like the hokiness of it. It's just like, yo, that's why I still to this day don't understand why Black people are so into religion, because the way, at least from what my generation was brought up in it, even makes it the audacity of it crazy. Because we got things like that, and of course we got the regular stuff. But I feel like Black religion, it goes the extra mile of making sure that you obey. Which, again, I guess like you said, it's effective because part of the reason why we were given religion was to make sure that we obeyed our master. Because all I see on my Facebook is that you need to give yourself to God and obey him from other people. And it's like, oh,
yeah, that's another example of one of the core fundamental things of those religions, the Judeo-Christian religions, that people always think is a good thing, because if you obey, if you prostrate yourself before God, that's seen as the ultimate act of humility, right? Which feels like a stretch. It feels like, I read it like the ultimate act of subjugation, pretty much of slavery in itself. Which, again, there are core tenets in these religions that everybody knows about, but I think that they're just assuming that they are good things to think. I don't personally think it's very good to be subjugating yourself to anybody. Even, I guess you should ask yourself, why does such a powerful being wish to subjugate you anyway? But
exactly. And this all accumulates to why I feel the way I feel, why I express this. I would say you express more bewilderment at it, where I express more anger towards it. Because it's like I feel like for you, it's more of like make sense of this. Where to me, it's just like come the fuck on. Like,
yes, I will say, to the extent that I am angry, it's certainly not anger in the same way you are. So
no, I legitimately have angst. What's this shit?
when I get
I can't
angry,
lie.
it's around like specific things like, you mentioned the sex ed
no,
thing.
I just in
That's
general.
dangerous. That like when they try to mess with education stuff, that is objectively dangerous to a society.
But no, that was the way it was, bro. That was like they did not want, because it was a huge debate on the whether or not children should know about. It was a lot of things that they felt like children should know and things like that. Like the concept of that birds and the bees thing was like, this is only for your parent if they want to let you know. Like you shouldn't let people know. And again, the birds and the bee thing, it's a perfect example of like, okay, it's a story that you can relate, but it ends up being more nonsensical than helpful because it's not really explaining sex or what you're going through or the emotions. It's a more of a placating thing. Because the way the birds and the bees story generally went, kind of always ended up, don't do it until you're married, or don't do it. Whereas sex education kind of was what developed that whole attitude. Look, understand this is the natural thing, but we need you to understand the consequences of this before you indulge. So if you do choose to do so, at least you're prepared somewhat mentally for what's to come. You know what I mean? Because the birds and the bees, you will laugh, but if you've ever heard like the traditional birds and the bees thing, it was about pollinating and shit like that.
Look, my mom told me about sex, so I never heard it. Like,
But no,
my mom's a nurse, so she
like
wasn't.
that birds and the bee thing isn't just a made up term. It was something. It was the way that they tried to metaphorically compare sex to a bird pollinating a plant in most cases, which dumb, just dumb, because nobody wanted to openly talk about sex, and it still was a rough area. Like part of the reason why I got sex ed, I know, is because my mom was kind of relieved that she didn't have to have that talk. Someone else could fucking do this.
I wish. I remember being sat down for that talk. That was gross.
Yeah.
I mean, parents, you should have that talk with your kids. I'm just saying. I don't expect it to be fun necessarily, but it's important. And I hope, by the way, that you get in trouble for pointing out that black community shit.
No, I say this shit all the time. So no, if you got a problem with me, black community, we can have that discussion.
No, I'm just saying because I've said it. You know what? It must be because I. What is the reaction you get when you say it? Like when you say, this, it's odd that the black community has such a strong attachment to religion. What is the reaction you get?
I get anger. I get generally like, dismissed.
Okay.
I get anger and dismissal for the most part.
Good. It's not just because I'm
No, it's not just
because it's just like
no. Because it's a really like hard thing for us as a community, African Americans. Even if you have issues with religion, to actually hear it said. Because I know people who like to say shit like there's no God and all of that. But when I start to make like serious discussions about this, they squirm. Because it's like, yeah, you're just saying that because at the moment you feel this out of anger. But it's like, yeah, I said that because I'm mad, but I don't want to offend. So we can't have this discussion, Michael, because this is too much. This is too deep. And I know it's funny because I can think of one person right now, if I were to have this conversation with, as much as they're not as religious as they were when I first met them, they would fucking eviscerate me and be so fucking angry at me, even though I know, like, in their heart, they fell off the, like, religious wagon. But no, it's like, it's this weird thing where, like, no matter what we do, you can't go. It's like, I guess maybe you're still got that ingrained. Don't go against what masters say type thing towards it. And yes, I'm saying this. Yes, I'm being very offensive when I say this. I know, but I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just being very, very honest. It may be that whole you're going against the master's word thing that may have been ingrained in us years ago. I don't know why. But it's like, when it comes to having a conversation on the depths of religion and its effectiveness and its harmfulness within the Black community, that shit gets really, really tense. And that's why I don't have this conversation with a lot of people, because I don't feel like going through that, like, whole, like, being, like, looked at, like, even though, again, I know people who've done some quote unquote extremely ungodly things, but me saying that just shuts the whole fucking room down.
Well, in fairness to Massa, I do think that is a problem across the board, because, I talked about the fundamental issues I have with religion being that it's based purely on faith and interpretation. But I guess the third issue there is that in our society, religion has a very special place in public discourse. It's much harder to attack religion than any other kind of idea. The closest thing is, like, for some point in time, like, politics. It was kind of, I shouldn't say it still is kind of, like, considered impolite to talk about politics, but I think religion is even further than that. It's just generally seen as impolite to say anything negative about religion at all. I've said some very benign ass things and gotten some pretty intense blowback.
Yeah. Oh no, this conversation right now, after what I just said, I'm truly going to hell.
I know. And the thing is, it's not just religious people, by the way. I've had non-religious people attack me because I guess I'm being mean to religion. And again, if I was being mean in that same way to, like, conservatism or some random philosophical idea, nobody would really bat an eye. You know what I mean? Like, nobody would care or notice. But when you talk about religion, it's almost like you're being seen as a bully trying to attack this thing that gives everybody
it's so true.
Meaning,
that is so
in their lives.
True. Yeah, because if I was to sit here and be like, fuck Trump, fuck the government, fuck the system, nobody would be like, either people who are truly believing into, like even if I said this to somebody who was a Trump fan, we would have our back and forth, but it would probably be more like, whatever, you just don't know better, they leave it alone. But yeah, if you to say something harsh about religion, it's like the gasp thing, like, I might agree, but I can't say that out loud.
No, I mean, obviously, I don't think that the things religion teaches from a scientific aspect are true. But it doesn't really bother me so much that people say it, so much as it's just too hard to disagree with in public. Because, again, you get seen as, like, a bully instead of somebody who's just in line with facts, I guess. Religion, at least for us in America, probably in the world generally, but it just has this special status for us socially, where it's just so much harder to touch than anything else. And that's what scares me about it, is that it's not just the fact that I disagree with you. You can say whatever the fuck you want, and then we can have a back and forth. The problem is, it is way more difficult to have a back and forth about religion. And for those of you who are religious, I think you don't notice this because you're too often surrounded by either people who are also about as religious as you or more, or you're just surrounded by people who find the topic too uncomfortable to touch. So you never really had to talk about it very much. But for me, like, it's almost never pleasant to talk about it.
Yeah, no, like, I'll say this, and I guess we should start closing out. But like as someone who likes storytelling as a whole, I have a kind of fascination with the you know fantasy of it all. Like some of the like romanticizing of it as far as from a storytelling aspect, because I think that's one of the reasons why I always feel like there is something about it that can be helpful, because it's just like the way I could find meaning out of The Last of Us. I could find meaning out of religious stories, kind of thing, But as with The Last of Us, I'm still able to separate the fact that this is just a story that these people are telling. And while there are some things that maybe can relate, I'm not going to lose myself in this world as if this is how I feel the world should be, just because this thing has captivated me so. I understand that there are different ways of thinking, different interpretations of the story, and not everybody's going to feel the same way I am. So I acknowledge that, I accept that, and I appreciate that. But for religion, for very religious people, again, they tend to give themselves over to this ideology, and nothing else tends to matter. And so it's hard dealing with a very religious person, because at the end of the day, they're so fixated on this one frame of reference that you just can't win. And again, like, even if that person isn't like deeply into this, because religion has this like high position in our society, people are very, very nervous and afraid to challenge that thing.
They should be, because they'll get attacked. And I think you put it well too, because this is the reason I was making that distinction between like varying levels of religiosity. I hate when people tell me, when they make the argument to me that, well, it has these stories and they can be used for good and teach and blah blah blah. Yes, they can, but I think usually the people who say that to me, I don't see them as very religious, because in saying that, they've already admitted that they just see the stories in the Bibles as just stories that you can use to learn from. And already I'm dismissing them as being particularly religious, because the argument I make is that you see them as just stories, but there are people who see them as historical facts that happened. And there is a major difference to be had there. You shouldn't assume that because you just look at the Bible as a collection of useful stories, that everybody else looks at the Bible that way, because many people read it to be quite literal, and it does have a major effect in their lives.
Yeah, and maybe it's because I'm a history person, because I have always adhered to one of the historical tenets that history is kind of created by the victors. So you have to kind of really pay attention to what's going on to appreciate history and to understand history. Not because, what you see in a history book isn't necessarily the end all be all. Again, we could romanticize World War II all we want about how we came through, but again, you look at the deeper meaning of history behind World War II. There are many years when the United States was like, nah, we're going to let the world do their thing and destroy themselves and sit in our little like place until we got fucked with. And then all of a sudden we became very concerned about the way of the world and how the world is going, so.
I had a quick religious question before we close off. I don't think I've ever asked you, but I was curious. Do you now, or have you ever believed in hell?
It's funny. I have a very maybe eclectic, more comedic view of hell, and I think this comes from a conversation that happened at a job that I worked. So, true story. Me and a couple of coworkers were sitting around talking, randomly having this off weird religious discussion, because it's funny. The two people that were involved in this discussion were atheists. One who came from, both of them, which came from very religious families, also, which made it even more funny. And I, wish them guys well. Patrick and Michael, you guys were awesome. But we had this whole discussion. We were having with this guy who one of the guys in this conversation, he was kind of that person who, yeah, I'm really religious, but I really ain't religious because of the shit I did, because he was a drug user and all types of crazy shit. His story is funny as hell. If you ever were curious, I should tell you his story one day. But it's like we're just sitting there and the subject of heaven and hell comes up, and one of the atheist guys was like, even though I don't believe in religion, I do believe that there's some sort of hell, and you know what I think it is? And he was like, and we were like, what? Like, hell isn't necessarily this place of fire and brimstone, but hell is probably like just the place that you really, really hate being at right now. And honestly, we all hate this job. So we are actually in our hell. Or if we die, we're all going to end up back together in this fucking place working for this asshole. Because that's what he thinks hell is. He thinks it's like, if there is a hell, it's just a cruel joke that they play on you, to putting you in a position or situation where you were the most uncomfortable or happy just to fuck with you. And so I've always used that as like hell from the biblical standpoint. Yeah, I don't think that's this fire, brimstone, you get tortured, soul, and all that. I think that if there is such a thing, you're just going to relive something really, really horrible over and over again in your life. Like, I would consider like my hell probably what? Having to fucking lose to you and fucking Eurostrix over and over again in video game bets. That's my fucking hell right there.
Good shit. Now we all know what Mike's hell is.
Yeah, you two fuckers are my hell.
I was curious because, the conversation's always about like if there's a god or not. Nobody ever talks about hell.
Nah. Like, and to be honest, to be like totally fair, I don't think that there's such a hell. Like, I would like to think, again, goes to my romanticizing and storytelling of religion. I would love to think that reincarnation would be like the best thing in the world. Like, you don't necessarily go to heaven or hell, but you have to fucking like do this shit over until eventually you get this shit right.
So Trump is like on his 50th try.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like
they're like, Jesus fucking Christ.
I feel like he's like somebody's just like, God damn it! Did you not learn the last time, Hitler? Let me put you back again.
Jesus. Okay. But I brought up because I was curious, and I actually did. I think I did believe in hell as a child, which
it's a fantastical story because it's a frightful thing as a youth to know that you're going to burn to death. Not burn to death, but you're going to eternally burn and suffer with no respite and no end if you don't behave a certain way. That's a fucking horrifying story.
No, it's quite psychologically alarming. I had been thinking all of a sudden back to one of the books I'd read. I think it was The God Delusion, and in one of the chapters he brings up the idea of the psychological harm it could bring to kids, and he referenced one of these women who, they were an adult and they weren't religious anymore, but she recalled with like great dread all the stories that were being pumped into her head about hellfire and all that stuff. Actually, he referenced a few stories. There was one where there's this girl and she was like really traumatized over the idea that her friend who wasn't of the same religion as her was going to burn in hell forever. And I remember thinking when I read that, like, I thought I was the only now atheist who was dreadfully afraid of hell. Because when I was a kid, like, I didn't, what it really fucked me up? I was never, it's going to sound really ironic, but I never really believed in any of the Christian stuff at any point in my life, including when I was very small. But the problem with that is that you hear about hell, which is this eternity of suffering, right? So for me as a child, it's like, again, it's going to sound stupid and ironic, but it was this constant dread where it's like, I'm going to go to hell because I don't believe, and I can't believe because it's just so objectively stupid. Every time I try to believe, I look at, this part of the Bible and it's like, well, that just is not true. It doesn't make any sense. It was like, I should put this. At some point, I actually wanted to be Christian because I was so afraid of hellfire as a toddler or whatever. It was like very psychologically jarring for me for like a long time. It was like I was falling into the pits of hellfire and I couldn't like get out of it because I could not make myself believe in what I now still think is rather unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that because again, part of how the thing of heaven and hell is taught is that you need to do whatever you can to get to heaven because if you don't, this is what you're going to end up in, and this place is not where you want. They reinforce that.
Yeah, it's brutal imagery.
You don't behave. Again, it's a control. It's the weaponization of religion. If you don't act a certain way, you're gonna go. This is what you're gonna get. You know what I mean? It's almost like a law. It's like you break the law, you go to jail.
I guess I thought of the subjugation.
Don't break the fucking law of religion.
I thought of the subjugation as even worse because I think what made it so frightening for me as a child was that it wasn't just acting a certain way, right? It was that you had to think a certain way, and I think that's what made it so scary. Is because you imagine this being who knows.
Yeah, because if you're not
thought.
Christian, this is where you're going. Yeah,
right. So you can't even pretend that you believe because in my mind I'm like, I can't believe. I was still teetering. I guess I wasn't calling myself atheist at the time. I guess I was pretty young, so I was still thinking through that shit. So I'm like, I always have this extreme doubt about it. But I believe it just enough to think, all right, there might be this being who's looking into my mind right now, and he can tell that I don't believe this shit. And if I'm wrong that he doesn't exist, I'm burning in hellfire forever. It was the type of thing that bothered me until like my early teen years. So I think that might be yet another reason why I tend not to want to use the religion as like even a jumping off point. Because even me, because I think people assume, as an atheist that I just, oh, you don't believe it, so it doesn't matter to you. I believed it enough for it to kind of fuck me up for a long time.
Yeah, no, because I mean, I could say that it's still the idea because you can sometimes say it joking, like I could sometimes say it jokingly, but I'm probably not joking. Like I think all of us do because one of the statements that we like to say when someone does something that we groan at or find like offensive or like you think you don't appreciate them being a dick. What's one of the first things that you say? You're going to hell for that. We all do it, no matter what. We all tell people you're going to go to hell for that.
Sure.
Yeah. So
I do mean it. Even now as an atheist, as an adult, and I genuinely don't believe in any of that stuff. Every once in a while, I feel like that small twinge of fear from like my childhood. So
yeah, no, hell is something that is definitely one of those things in religion that is hard to break for a lot of us because no one wants to go through a situation like that. No one wants to feel like they're going to end up in something like that. You know what I mean? It's a horror story. It's not just a religious thing. It's a fucking horror story. Like no one wants to run into Jason if Jason was real. And hell is like it's the universal Jason.
Scary. I mean, you're talking about an impossibly powerful being who knows your every thought and will impart punishment upon you.
Yeah.
Forever. Like there's nothing. Like I would be far less afraid of like Freddy because I assume once he kills me, I'll be dead. Like
right, exactly.
It will be over.
Like I may suffer and I may go in a horrible way, but at least it will end. Where this is like, yeah, nah, you with me? You're gonna fucking like you can't even say you're gonna regret this because how could you feel regret to eternally suffer? At that point, it's like what do you feel from eternal suffering? What the fuck is eternal? The thought of like, how do you deal with eternal suffering alone? It's just maddening. God damn.
It's rough. But I just wanted to throw that out there because again, I think a lot of people with their varying religiosity will say, it's been good in my life. It has all these good impacts. I just think you don't notice enough the negative ones. And I wanted to point out one just for me personally to show that even as someone who doesn't believe it, it can still have a fairly negative impact.
It's because you know where you're about to go. That's
Sure.
fine.
And I can tell somebody would probably use that as an argument.
Blasphemous. Goddamn.
He just doesn't believe in God because he doesn't want to have to answer to him or whatever. So probably just lost all credibility.
Yeah.
But
No. Yeah, I agree. No, please don't hurt me, sir. No, don't do this to me. Like, I still believe in you. We're cool. We're cool, right? We're cool. We're cool. But no. Yeah. So
when I get to the pearly gates, I'm gonna be like, fuck, and it's just like,
wouldn't it be kind of fucking funny though if that's what happens? Like at the end of the day, like we find out heaven and hell still exist. Like all the atheists, God's like, yeah, y'all are right. That bullshit they taught y'all was right. Come in, we're gonna hang out and we're gonna like have real discussions about shit. All y'all motherfuckers out here using this religion shit to do all this, you go to hell. You literally go to hell.
It would be
that would be the greatest joke in life, right there on people, on religious people. Like that would be so
a lot of people in hell.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, this is where you guys belong. Like all you elevated people, come with me. The rest of y'all figure it out down there.
I think we've ended on that since we just saw the religious people will go to hell.
Oh gosh, I'm gonna go to sleep and have nightmares because God's gonna come into my dreams. Like, really, Michael, really. All right, so thank you everybody for listening. For those of you who stayed to the end, I'm sure some of you just bailed once we got into the religion part. It's like, nope. You saved your souls, or you've called us blasphemers and went about your business. So good on you, I guess. Anyway, any parting words you have to say before I finish closing?
God bless you all. Trying to get back into God's good graces real quick.
You need to go get a rosary right now, sir, and start saying Hail Marys.
I would just say, to all the religious people out there, I guess engage in the conversation, because I think a lot of you assume that you look at the things you get from religion and just assume that you cannot get them anywhere else. Like I said, sense of community, sense of belonging, sense of purpose, feeling loved, understanding how miraculous the world can be and all that shit. There's other places to get that stuff other than religion. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I guess my closing words are: please don't take this as me hating you as people. I hate you as people if you're a bad person and you do horrible things. Just because you're religious doesn't necessarily mean I can't fuck with you. Because again, I know plenty of people who are very religious, who I have great relationships with. Just hey, understand that I have a different perspective from you, and be like those people in my life. Understand that, yeah, that's how you feel. I feel a different way. I can respect that. And that's it. Don't be mad that somebody doesn't feel the same thing you do. Because I am the person who, thinks This Is America is an overrated song. And I will continue to say that. And that's going to piss a lot of you off right now, too. But fuck it. Why not? I piss people off enough, so that ain't gonna hurt. All right, so thank you again. Appreciate you guys for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time on the Reason Reborn. Peace.